Welcome, you've arrived at my channel where every whisper holds a secret, and every silence screams in the dark. Tonight, you're not just a listener, but a witness. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the darkness speak. Prison of the Forgotten. They say that place is just an old abandoned prison camp, deserted since World War II. But if you've ever heard that sound, the faint hiss, like a snake's breath in the night, then you would know there is something else still there, something that's never been listed in any military records. The Black Ridge prison camp sits isolated in the high mountains of Wyoming, a place where the mist hangs thick year-round, as if it had never lifted. The locals call it the grave in the forest. The name isn't ornamental, but quite literal, because 28 people have gone missing around the camp over the course of 10 years, and more, strangely, not one of them was ever found. Official military reports state that the camp ceased operations in 1945. However, recent satellite images collected by an independent research group showed dim lights coming from within at 3 a.m., a time when no one dares approach, especially not on a full moon night. We, a group of 4 explorers and paranormal enthusiasts, decided to break the rule. We wanted to personally explore the legendary prison camp rumored to hold the souls of those wrongly convicted, where there was once an inhumane experiment conducted under the guise of psychological research on prisoners. At first, we only wanted to record a video, creating a truthful documentary about a hidden chapter of American history. But after that night, only 2 of us returned, and since then, I've never dared step into a dark room again. I'm telling this story not to convince you to believe, but to make you understand. There are places we should never set foot in, not even once. We arrived near Black Ridge on an early autumn day, no rain, but the cold was bone-chilling. It was a strange cold, unlike typical mountain weather. It made my skin burn, as if being scraped by metal. The group consisted of me, Michael the cameraman, Jenna, paranormal analyst, and Tom the genius hacker who had once broken into security cameras at the White House. Of course, only in a simulation. At least, I hope so. We drove an off-road vehicle, cutting through more than 10 miles of wilderness. No cell signal, no GPS, relying solely on a hand-drawn map given to us by an old man who wandered the town. He had also warned us with a cryptic sentence: if you see a person wearing a prison uniform but with no face, don't speak. Just reverse your car and never come back. We all laughed at the time. Really, we did. But when the car neared the camp's gate, all electronic signals began to flicker. The camera shut down, the phone lost power, the flashlight flickered, even though we had just replaced the batteries. The air before the gate was stifling. No birds, no wind, nothing, except for the eerie silence. A thick fog like glue clung to the rusty iron fence, with faded letters almost invisible due to the years. Property of the United States military. Do not enter. Tom unlocked the gate in just 12 seconds, like it was a joke. But the gate didn't creak like usual, it just opened, quietly. So quietly, it was unsettling. Jenna murmured, "It's like it's been waiting for someone for a long time." And we stepped inside. None of us knew, but we had just crossed the final boundary between the human world and something older than American history itself. As soon as we stepped through the iron gate, the first thing that caught my eye was not a secure prison cell, but a silent, desolate land that felt off. The main building appeared like a ghost in the mist, brick walls stained, a roof caving in, windows shattered, as if abandoned for centuries. But what sent a chill down my spine was not the decay, but the feeling that this place had never truly been empty. Michael raised the camera. Despite the lack of battery, just a habit of the trade, he smirked, but I could see his hand trembling. Jenna began using an energy meter, the EMF detector, and it emitted a continuous beep, as if we were in a high electromagnetic interference zone. There's no power, no generators, but the EMF is flashing red constantly, Jenna whispered. Tom, on the other hand, seemed unbothered. He walked straight to the old security room, curious about the equipment. But after a few minutes, he shouted, "Hey, come look at this. Some of the cameras still have a signal." We rushed over, and I saw a dim screen showing footage from years ago. We saw a man in a prison guard uniform dragging someone down the hallway, blood staining the floor. Then the screen flickered. Another image appeared, Perhaps the solitary confinement room. An inmate sat facing the wall, his back covered in long gashes, blood still oozing down. But the timestamp on the screen was today. Michael stepped back, panicked. This has to be old footage, right? It's just a replay. Jenna didn't respond. She stood frozen, staring at another screen where a man in prison uniform number 13 was standing, staring directly into the camera, then looking outside, as though looking straight at us. We bolted out of the room immediately. No one spoke a word. There was no need to. The feeling, like something inside this camp, knew we had arrived, and it was not happy. I led the group deeper inside. A foolish decision. I still regret. The main corridor led to the main prison block. The stone floor, icy cold, slippery with moss and something viscous like dried blood. On the walls were scrawled words, seemingly written with fingernails. Most of them had been worn away by time, but one line was still fresh. They didn't die, they're just waiting. Michael started breathing heavily. Tom stopped joking. Jenna remained silent, her eyes seemingly drawn to the rusted iron doors. I touched one of the doors, and it was scorching hot, like there was fire burning behind it, even though the inside was pitch dark. Suddenly, bang, one of the solitary confinement doors swung open by itself. Inside was empty. No light, no wind, no sound, just ... An old dusty tape recorder, lying in the middle of the floor. No one should have picked it up, but Tom, too curious, pressed play. A deep, hoarse male voice crackled from the tape, echoing in the lifeless space. Day 312. He's back. Every night, another body disappears from the cold cellar. The warden locked off section 3, but he doesn't need a key. I've seen his eyes of something not human. Suddenly, the recording cut off. And at the same time, our flashlights went out. The darkness swallowed us whole. No sound, no light, only the heavy breathing of Michael and the clicking noise from Jenna's flashlight as she tried to turn it back on. But nothing happened. The batteries were full, the device was intact, and everything remained engulfed in pitch black. A cold breeze swept through the hallway. Though all the windows were closed tight, I could distinctly feel something glide across my back, icy cold like ice, but completely invisible. It felt like a human figure, without a clear shape, but carrying an indescribable sense of dread. Did you ... hear anything? Tom whispered. His voice was faint, and then in the dark a whisper echoed, very faint, very close to the ear, as if someone was standing right next to us. Double quotes, we ... don't die ... Jenna trembled, gripping my hand tightly. Michael began to cry silently. He was always the strong one, but in that moment, I knew he had shattered. If even a seasoned cameraman could break down like that, then what was here was no joke. Suddenly, the flashlight clicked on. No one touched it. It lit up, but it shone upwards, towards the ceiling where a pair of red eyes were staring down from a corner in the shadows. We all simultaneously craned our necks to look. Nothing. The eyes vanished in an instant, so fast I thought I had imagined it. But both Michael and Jenna screamed, proving I wasn't alone in that hallucination. We turned and ran toward the exit, but the hallway was now twice as long as it was before. The door leading outside was no longer where it had been. It was as if the prison was changing at its will. Tom screamed, pointing at an open doorway at the end of the hall. Over there, run. We rushed in, without thinking. Inside, there was no escape, only a torture room. The ceiling was lined with metal hooks. The floor was covered in dried blood, but the stench still lingered heavily. There were scratch marks on the walls, as if someone had been locked in here and tried to escape with their bare hands. And in the center of the room there was a long wooden table. On the table was a torn, discolored photo. We all looked at each other. I walked closer and picked up the photo. It was a picture of 4 people, 2 guards, a man in a psychiatrist's outfit, and one person who was bound backward in an iron chair. The bound person had no face. The face had been shaved white, or had been ... completely erased. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank, pale space like wax melted away. On the back of the photo, there was a line of text, Subject 13, no humanity left, cannot be destroyed, let him sleep. My heart pounded like it was about to explode. Subject 13 was the last prisoner, the one who had disappeared from all the records, and now He was no longer sleeping. I placed the photo down and stepped back, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was a mess. Jenna whispered as if speaking to herself. Subject 13. Why is there no file, no name, no face? Michael shook his head, his voice trembling. I've read through dozens of files in the state library. No one has ever mentioned this person. It's like it never existed. Tom stared at the table, where the photo still lay quietly, as if mocking us. Suddenly, Tom pointed to a dark corner of the room. Wait, I think there's something under the table. He bent down and pulled out a black leather notebook, thick with dust and cobwebs. The cover had no title, but inside were frantic scribbles, as if written in a panic. One page had been blacked out with charcoal, but a portion of it was still clear. Day 78, he has seen me. Not through the camera, not through the glass. He looked straight into my mind. His eyes were like black holes, pulling my soul down. I turned to the next page, the last one, with only one line written in dried blood. If you're reading this, then he has awakened. As soon as I pulled my eyes away from the notebook, the door behind us slammed shut. I spun around. No one was there, but the door, which had just opened, was now locked tight, with no gap to be seen. Suddenly, Jenna clutched her head and collapsed to the floor. Something. In my head, his voice. Michael and Tom rushed to help Jenna up. She curled up, trembling, still holding her temples as if trying to pull something out of her mind. He whispered everyone's name. He knows us. I felt goosebumps all over my skin. The room began to grow cold. Very quickly, our breath started to appear as mist. The flashlight flickered, the light dancing as if it were being swallowed by the darkness on the ceiling. Red eyes appeared again, but this time it wasn't an illusion. A shadow, without a clear shape, as if made of smoke and rotting flesh, was slowly crawling down from the ceiling, its bones creaking quietly. Tom stepped back. Shit, something is staring at me. Suddenly, Michael screamed. Exit, over there. He pointed to a narrow passage that had just opened behind a rack of torture tools. It looked like an old, forgotten escape tunnel, hidden by a pile of rusty wire mesh and rotting wooden crates. Without thinking, I grabbed Jenna and ran ahead, Tom and Michael following. When I turned around for the last time, the shadow was nearly crawling along the floor, almost breathing down our necks. Whispers echoed through the tunnel. I'm not dead. I've never slept. I will take it all back. We ran through the tunnel as if being chased by ghosts, which, in fact, we were being chased by real ones, until the metal door at the end slammed open and we tumbled out, rolling into a patch of wasteland behind the prison. Silence. No more whispers. Only heavy breathing and the horrifying truth we had just uncovered. We lay flat on the cold earth, gasping for breath, sweat and blood mixing with the mud under our hands. In the night sky, there were no stars, just a deep, endless black, pressing down on the world like a death shroud. Jenna was still trembling. I wrapped my jacket around her shoulders, my eyes scanning around. This was clearly the land behind the prison, but why was there no exit? Michael screamed. We have to call for help. We need to get out of this damned place right now. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Tom also turned on the camera, planning to check the footage from the storage room. But the screen only displayed a string of glitchy characters as if haunted: :13.13.13.13.13.13.13 F*****. Tom cursed, throwing the camera to the ground. It shattered. I looked at the stone wall behind us, where the back fence of the prison should have been. Now it was higher, vertical, no trace of the old path. Jenna tightened her grip on my hand, whispering, "We're still inside. It won't let us leave." Michael gasped. "What do you mean?" "We just crawled out of that hole." I turned around. The tunnel door was gone. Only a solid concrete wall remained, as if that escape had never existed. The space was distorting us. I pulled out the old map we had printed from the prison files. I looked carefully. This patch of land should have been next to the eastern fence, where an iron gate led to the main road. But now where it should have been there was only a ruined chapel. Wait, wasn't it destroyed in 1954? Jenna mumbled. Tom growled. "Something is repeating the past." Reluctantly, we moved toward the chapel. Each step on the grass felt like treading on broken bones. The silence around us was suffocating. only the sound of wind howling through the broken walls, like the wailing of forgotten souls. Jenna pointed to the chapel. Wall characters crudely scratched with fingernails or bones. They never left. A strong, putrid stench rose from inside the chapel, but there was something alluring about it. As if something inside was calling each of our names. Michael shuddered. I hear my mum. Her voice. Jenna suddenly turned around, looking at me, her eyes bloodshot, but surprisingly alert. No one should split up. No matter what happens, no matter what we hear or see. Don't split up. I nodded, but deep down, I knew we were walking into the belly of the beast, not trying to escape, but sinking deeper into the prisons past a place that had hidden away sins that had never been written in words. The chapel door creaked open with a long, eerie sound, like bones being snapped. The putrid, damp stench hit us immediately, forcing the group to cover our noses. Inside was pitch dark, only our flashlights sweeping over the decayed pews, a ceiling covered in cobwebs, and an upside-down crucifix. Tom whispered, "Even God has abandoned this place." The light flickered across a hand-painted picture in front of the pulpit. The colors had faded, but the image was unmistakable. A faceless man chained with iron shackles, surrounded by 12 masked figures praying in a strange language. Jenna froze. "I've seen this picture. In the prison files. This is a ceiling." "Ritual ceiling who?" Michael asked. "Prisoner 13, she whispered. "He didn't die in the gas chamber. They locked him here." A cold chill ran down my spine. It felt like the very space around us was compressing, heavy, and time no longer moved in the right direction. We moved closer to the pulpit. There was an odd book on it written in a script none of us recognized, but Jenna stared at it, confused. Yeah, I can read this." "No way," I interrupted. "What language is this?" "I don't know, but the voice in my head is reading each word." Jenna shakily picked up the book. Her eyes seemed to turn gray for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse as if being forced from her throat. "Tentarusha Elohim, you open the door for the one who has never left." Immediately, the chapel shook. A deep growl echoed from the depths of the earth. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It sounded like the rage of something suppressed for centuries, now finally breaking free. Tom screamed, "What the hell? Run!" But it was too late. The walls began to change color, shifting from gray to blood red, then to pitch black. The decayed pews began to shift, as if with a mind of their own. My flashlight beam moved to Jenna. She stood motionless, eyes rolled back in her head, still muttering the incantations. Michael rushed to pull her away, but was thrown backward as if struck by an invisible force. I rushed to catch him, but when I looked up, Jenna was gone. Only a gray shadow hovered slowly in front of the pulpit, spinning in circles. Its face was an abyss, a deep, empty void, and it was smiling. "I have awoken." We froze. We couldn't scream. We couldn't run. "You have opened the final door, and now no one will leave." I don't remember what happened next. All I know is, when I opened my eyes, I was standing in a damp, cold, ancient prison corridor. No Tom, no Michael, no Jenna. Just me, and sound of faint crying echoing from the end of the hall. Tom, Michael, anyone. No response. Only the sound of water dripping, each drop like the ticking of a slow clock. I followed the crying. Beneath my feet was a puddle of diluted blood, spreading out from a rusted cell. I stepped closer, peering through a small crack in the iron door. Inside it was me, a child, wearing a red sweater, sitting curled up, holding its knees, crying, silently. No way. The door opened on its own. I stepped in, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on the ground, surrounded by prisoners with distorted faces, no eyes, no noses, whispering, "You betrayed, you informed." I stepped back, but my foot got caught on something. I looked down, a corpse with its tongue cut out, holding a piece of paper with my name on it. "It's not me. I've never been here." My voice rang out, but was immediately choked by a pain in my throat. An invisible rope tightened around my neck, lifting me up. Meanwhile, Michael woke up in the decaying kitchen. But instead of silence, the sound of pots and pans clanging rang out. The flickering light shone on a human shadow hanging upside down from the ceiling. The freezer door swung open. Inside was a decaying body, but with Michael's face. Am I dead? A whisper came from behind. No, you're not dead. You're repeating. Michael spun around. A black man, in prison clothes, holding a knife, his eyes empty like stone. I remember you. You were the guard who escorted me. You let them beat me to death, just to stay safe. No, it wasn't me. Michael stumbled backward, his hands shaking. Then why do I remember your face clearer than my own name? The knife came down, Michael screamed. But just as the blade touched his neck, everything disappeared. He woke up in the medical room. In his hands was still blood. At the same time, Tom opened his eyes in the old execution room. The electric chair, the wires, the observation window, everything was still intact. But what froze him in place was, strapped to the electric chair was himself. Welcome back, Officer Thomas Wade. A female voice came from the speaker. Crime, wrongful execution, sentence, to be executed by yourself. Tom screamed. Stop, I don't have the power to decide. But you were silent, and silence is a crime. The electric chair began to screech. The whole room flashed. Tom could see himself turning to ashes. In the center of the vortex, Jenna was standing in a reversed church. The ceiling was on the floor above. Every religious symbol twisted, out of shape. A voice echoed in her mind, deep and drawn out. You are the chosen one, the only one who can read our language. I don't want to. I don't understand you. You do understand, because within you is him. Before her, the mirror shattered, revealing the image of a faceless figure with two black holes, for eyes oozing blood. You awakened me. Now I will use you to be born again. A scream tore through her throat. Jenna jolted awake, gasping for air, as if pulled from the depths of the ocean. She found herself sitting in the main hall where the group had once gathered. A cold blue light flickered from the overhead lamp, casting eerie shadows of dried bloodstains across the floor. The room was silent, but this time the silence felt like a trap. Heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. Jenna startled, standing up, clutching the only flashlight that was still working. Tom appeared, his eyes sunken deep, as if he'd aged years in just 1 hour. Behind him was Michael, his sleeve torn, his left hand trembling uncontrollably. No one spoke, they only stared at each other. Each person saw something wrong with the others, as if they hadn't truly returned from that hallucination, or if something had returned with them. Tom began, his voice hoarse. We need to leave this place. Do you know the way out? Jenna asked, her eyes fixed on Tom's neck. There was a burn mark, round, exactly the shape of an electric chair's restraint. I'm not sure, but I remember there was a tunnel behind the guard room. You remember? Jenna tightened her grip on the flashlight. Or, did you work here? Both of them turned to look at Jenna. The air froze. Michael spoke up, his voice shaking. Wait, what do you mean? Jenna didn't take her eyes off Tom. From the beginning, I thought something was off. You know the map, you know the prison's history, and you knew the name of Prisoner 13. Before I even read it, Tom glared at her. Who do you think I am? An imposter? I'm the only one who kept us calm. No, you're the only one who admitted to executing the wrong person. Michael stepped back. My God, is that true? Tom looked down at the floor. I used to be a guard, but I left the job 20 years ago. I didn't kill anyone. It's just I know of one case, one where the person who was executed had no name in the records. And then, his voice trailed off. The whole prison descended into madness. People saw apparitions, heard voices from the pipes. Some committed suicide, some disappeared. A cold wind blew through. The door at the end of the hall opened inexplicably, though no one touched it. Jenna slowly walked toward it, the flashlight scanning the hallway, and then she saw it. A symbol, scratched into the wall with blood, faint but unmistakable. 13. The moment Jenna turned to call the others, the flashlight flickered and died. Everything sank into complete darkness. In the dark, there was breathing. Not one person, but ... 3. Something was breathing with them. Double quotes, Tom ... Michael. No answer. Instead, a voice whispered inside Jenna's head. The traitor has returned to where he belongs. Choose. Believe in the past, or believe in yourself. Jenna silently walked down the dark corridor, her grip tightening around the flashlight, as if it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Tom and Michael ... nowhere to be seen. The door that had just opened on its own earlier led to a long abandoned administrative hallway, dusty, crumbling, papers rotting and scattered across the floor as though time had forgotten this place half a century ago. She passed a small iron door with a rusty sign that read, "Archive, Classified." The old lock had been broken long ago. Jenna gently pushed. The door screeched open with a chilling metallic sound, revealing a small room filled with old filing cabinets, stacked haphazardly like a paper maze. She shone the flashlight, her eyes quickly scanning the labels on the files. Number 221, John D. Number 222, Adam W. Number 223, unidentified. She froze. One file cabinet had no name, no identification number, only a frantic scribble, as if written in dried blood 13. Jenna took a deep breath and opened the drawer. Inside was a file wrapped in black cloth, thick, heavy, smelling of mold and decay from years of neglect. She opened it. The first page was a black and white photograph. With trembling hands, she shone the flashlight on it. The face in the photo almost made her drop the file. No, it can't be. It was Michael. Not the Michael she knew now, but someone who looked 90% like him. The hair, the eyes, the structure of the face. The only difference was, the person in the photo was wearing prison clothes. The date below read, executed, 1963, crime, unknown, identity, unknown, code number 13. A sound echoed from behind. Jenna turned round, and Michael was standing there. What are you looking for? The flashlight beam fell on him. Michael's face no longer held the fear it once did. His eyes were empty. I don't know. Why does he look like me? Michael walked closer, peering at the file. His hand trembled, but not from fear. From memories. I've dreamed of this place so many times. Since I was a child, dreamed of what place. Jenna stepped back. The prison, the electric chair screams, and a dark room where I was locked up, with someone like a second me. He turned to look at Jenna. His eyes were filled with tears. I think I've lived here before, or a version of me died here. You mean, you're the reincarnation of prisoner number 13? Michael didn't answer, but a whisper emerged from the walls, as if confirming for him he never left. On the wall behind Michael, blood began to seep out, forming a circle with the number 13 inside. The room grew unbearably cold. The file in Jenna's hand spontaneously combusted. No flames, but it burned quietly, turning to ash right before her. Michael collapsed, hands clutching his head, screaming, "It's coming, it's waking up. I can't stop it anymore." The atmosphere in the room suddenly thickened like something invisible had flooded in. Jenna gripped the flashlight tightly, while Michael remained slumped on the floor, trembling. The sound of wind howled through the four sealed walls. No windows, no cracks, but the room was filled with murmurs, whispers in a language not of the living. Jenna stepped back, her eyes scanning the room. The door she had just entered was gone. No, it can't be. She rushed to the spot, banging hard against the wall, but it was cold concrete. Michael lifted his head, his eyes filled with tears, but also with terror. "We're not here anymore. What the hell are you talking about? We've crossed the boundary, Jenna, the boundary between life and something else." The floor began to tremble. The old file cabinets shed sheets of paper like decaying snowflakes, hovering in mid-air, then stopped frozen in time. Jenna stepped back toward the wall. The wall was slowly bleeding, forming images, scenes of torture, punishment, bodies buried alive. Among them was herself, Jenna's face pale, lips cracked, eyes wide open, staring in horror on the wall. "Is this some kind of mind game?" she whispered, clutching her head. "No, this is memory, but not your memory. It's the memory of this place." Michael stood up, his hand trembling as he pointed to a corner of the room. There, an old rusted bed with iron chains, still bound to the bed frame. Above it was a deep indentation in the shape of a human body. "This is the final solitary confinement room, for those whose names can't be called, with no paperwork, no release date. No one knew they existed. He died here, but it also began here." Jenna stepped back, stumbling over something. It was an old mirror. In the mirror, she saw herself, but in a prison uniform. The number 13 was clearly visible on the chest. Behind her was Mikkel, but not Michael anymore. It was a creature with a human face, hollow black eyes, and a mouth stretched from ear to ear. She turned around. Nothing was there. She looked back at the mirror. The creature was reaching out from the glass. Jenna screamed, smashing the mirror, and in that moment, all sounds disappeared. The room became absolute silence. No breathing, no heartbeat, only ... A soft laughter deep within her mind. Jenna, the voice, it wasn't Michael's. It wasn't anyone's. It felt like it came from inside her head, but echoed as if from deep beneath the earth. Michael placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice now eerily calm. Jenna, you've been chosen. Chosen for what? She screamed. To complete ... What was left unfinished. He couldn't escape. But you can take him further. What are you talking about? He needs a ... body. Jenna stepped back, her flashlight trembling in her hand. You're not Michael. What are you? Her voice cracked, as if her throat was tightening. Michael stood there. Half of his face still looked like him, while the other half started to contort, as if being pulled by an invisible force from within. His right eye was pitch black, the iris glowing red, like glowing embers, flickering as though peering into her very soul. Don't you remember, Jenna? His voice echoed, but suddenly it overlapped. One voice was Michael's, the other was something older, darker. Who am I? Jenna backed up to the wall, her chest feeling like it was being squeezed. The wall behind her felt as cold as ice, but it dripped warm water. Jenna turned around and saw her hands were covered in blood, fresh blood. She screamed. Suddenly, the space cracked open, a small tear like a wound, emitting a sinister red light and a screeching sound. Not the wind, not a human voice, but the sound of hundreds of fingernails scraping against rusted steel. Michael, or whatever had taken over him, slowly turned his head toward the crack. He's coming. The wind picked up inside the sealed room. Papers flew in all directions. The ceiling seemed to be pulled up, revealing another hallway, long and endless, with flickering greenish light. It resembled an abandoned hospital. Michael no longer spoke. Instead, he walked toward the crack, each step making the ground tremble lightly. Jenna screamed, "You're Michael. You've been helping me from the start. Don't do this." The creature turned back, and this time, another face emerged. Behind Michael's head, the face of a prisoner, but the skin was decayed, lips darkened, the pupils spinning aimlessly. "He did help you." "Yes," the eerie voice whispered inside Jenna's mind, but Michael's mouth didn't move. "And now, it's your turn to help him. Finish what was left undone." Suddenly, everything went silent. The room was pitch black. Jenna turned on the flashlight. Michael was gone. She was alone. No, not exactly. On the wall, where the shackled bed had been, a deep carved inscription appeared in the concrete. 13. No escape. At the same time, a sharp, searing pain shot through Jenna's head, images flashing in her mind. A red girl, standing in the middle of a ruined prison yard, surrounded by fallen soldiers, blood pooling in the dirt. That girl was Jenna. I've been here before. Jenna stood motionless before the cold concrete wall, where the words 13, no ascension, had just appeared. Her fingers gently touched the inscription. Her fingertips began to bleed. Suddenly, a soft click echoed from behind as if the wall knew she was there. A small crack appeared. The air inside was so cold that her breath turned to mist. Jenna shone the flashlight and stepped inside. An old winding staircase appeared before her, covered in moss. The metal rusted, and beneath her feet, hundreds of small shoe prints, not from prisoners, but from children. The echo of her footsteps reverberated as she descended, each step at first only the sound of her own footsteps, but then another set of footsteps followed. She turned around. No one. The flashlight flickered. At the bottom, Jenna faced a large iron door with faded lettering that read, "Special Treatment Area. Unauthorized personnel, keep out." She pushed the door. The hinges screeched, like the cry of a soul bound in chains. Inside was an underground medical facility, flooded infirmary, with yellow water dripping from the ceiling, and the walls lined with dried forebags. Each bed was empty, but the blankets were still neatly folded. In the center of the large room, a charred black and white photo. A group of children standing in a straight line, their eyes hollow, with a doctor in a long lab coat behind them. The Doctor's face was burned beyond recognition, but Jenna saw his eyes. And they were exactly like Michael's when he had changed. Transmutation experiment. Children are the perfect vessel. A voice suddenly echoed in her head, though no one was around. Jenna touched the photo. The flashlight went out. Time stopped. In the darkness, a series of images flashed in her mind. An underground laboratory, where children were injected with drugs and recited strange incantations. A little girl herself forced to sit in a circle of blood. A deep voice repeated, "Perfect vessel, no parents, no identity, no memory." Then, everything went silent. The flashlight flickered back on. Jenna was sitting on the floor, her hands clutching her head, tears streaming uncontrollably. "I am ... one of them." Footsteps echoed from behind. Jenna turned this time. It wasn't Michael. A little girl in a white dress, pale face, hair long and covering her face, stood at the exit. "Do you remember?" The voice didn't come from her mouth. It echoed directly into Jenna's mind, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. "They locked you up because you survived, but we ... did not." The girl stepped forward, each step causing water to rise on the floor beneath her. The wall behind Jenna began to change shape into a mirror, reflecting herself. But in the mirror, it wasn't the adult Jenna, it was 8-year-old Jenna, her body covered in 4 lines, her eyes empty. "You've forgotten." But he hasn't. As the scene ended, Jenna lifted her head, finally believing that she wasn't just a victim, but a part of this tragedy. Across the hall was a door, with the symbol of an eye and a 6-pointed star swung open, and her name, Jenna, 4527, was carved into it. The heavy door engraved with the 6-pointed star slowly creaked open. The metallic sound echoed like the screams of a soul tortured for centuries. Inside was a round room, the walls etched with ancient symbols from a language Jenna had never seen before. On the floor was a circle of dried blood, and at the center, a stone throne. It looked like a seat made of human bones and earth behind the throne. A statue stood about 3 meters tall, the form of a creature, half human, half beast, with hollow eyes and a mouth wide open as if silently screaming. Jenna stepped inside, each step seeming to pull her in with an invisible force. The room began to vibrate lightly, a cold wind swirling around her, despite the lack of any visible breeze. Then, from the dark corner, the little girl in the white dress emerged, no longer a vague figure. Her face was now clear, cheeks, eyes as white as the void, but glistening with tears. "You are the last one, the last to remember ... And yet still trying to forget." Jenna stepped back, gripping her flashlight. "Now a useless object. I'm not part of this. You are wrong." The girl pointed to the stone throne. "You once sat there, voluntarily." A rush of another memory flooded in. Little Jenna, kneeling in the blood circle, chanting ancient words, surrounded by adults in red cloaks. With each word spoken, a part of her soul was torn away. "Why did I do this?" Jenna choked out. "Because you are the vessel, and we are the keys." The wall behind the girl cracked open, revealing a dark, brick-lined corridor, from which whispers echoed. "Return. Return the body. Return the ritual." The girl continued. "You were taken, cleansed, and filed away as an anonymous orphan, but your soul was still tethered here." Jenna screamed. "I'm human. I'm not a vessel. I'm not a container for these insane, dark rituals." The girl smiled a sad smile, as if she already knew the inevitable end. "You were never normal, Jenna. They made you. From the ritual, from blood, from the curse, and now you've returned to complete it." The stone statue behind Jenna cracked apart. A skeletal arm reached out, trembling as if waking from centuries of slumber. Girl rushed to embrace Jenna, whispering, "If you don't choose, it will choose for you." A flash of red light blazed, and the entire room vanished. Jenna opened her eyes. She was lying in the forest, naked, her body caked in dirt. Before her was the dilapidated wooden house, where this journey had begun. But now, from the direction of the house, Michael emerged, his body covered in scratches, his eyes now pitch black. He said nothing. He just stared at her, as though he already knew the truth. Jenna opened her eyes again, not in the forest, not in the stone cellar. She was lying on a cold metal bed, flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The air smelled of antiseptic and old dust. On the wall, a faded silver logo in the shape of a crescent, surrounding an eye, the symbol she had seen in the hallucinations beneath the basement. "Welcome back, codename 13. The voice came from a speaker embedded in the wall. Deep, detached, but familiar. Jenna shot up, her eyes darting around the room. A two-way mirror, a red blinking camera. She screamed, "I'm Jenna, I'm not, whatever you're labeling me." The voice responded immediately. Real name, Jenna M. Thorne. Codename assigned, 13. Role, host, subject. Final stage, memory erased in 1998, reactivated in 2023, after a signal from the Colorado quarantine zone. A cold shiver ran down Jenna's spine. Colorado. That was where the old cabin was. She hadn't gotten lost. She had been led there. "Who are you?" "We are the gatekeepers, and you are the rusting key." The wall silently opened. A long corridor appeared, the dim lights stretching endlessly. Jenna stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly. On every wall were photographs, children, numbers carved into the back of their necks, each image marked with the birth and death years. The last photo was of her, but there was no death year. It only read, status, active. An automatic door slid open. Inside stood an older man in a silver-gray lab coat, holding a tablet. He looked up, his eyes full of a mixture of regret and pride. "We once gave you a chance for a fresh start, erased memories, a new name, a new family, but your genes never truly rest. Who are you?" Jenna gripped the edge of the table. "I am the one who created you." In both the figurative and literal sense, she froze. "I am not human. You are human, but reprogrammed. Inside you, there is a blind spot where we hid what the other forces wanted to possess." "What forces?" Jenna whispered. "The ones we call the Faceless Ones, an ancient entity not belonging to this world, but summoned through a ritual and bound to the mind of a child. That child is you." Jenna felt the room spin. Her memories shattered into fragments, images of shadows kneeling, chants, blood dripping onto her forehead. Saw the cabin, the girl in the white dress, Michael, what was all that? Michael was a secondary trigger, the one who monitored you in case things went out of control. But he failed. And the girl, he sighed, she was the last piece of the soul, the only one who still showed compassion when everyone wanted to seal you away. The lights in the room flickered, a warning signal blared. Energy core compromised. Host is unstable. Gate 2 is preparing to open. Jenna looked up, her eyes turned pale gray, her pupils splitting into two straight lines. "No, don't let it, escape, Jenna gripped her head, blood starting to drip from her nose. The old man stepped back, pressing a red button. "Activate the sealing ritual again, quickly," but it was too late. A black beam of light erupted from Jenna's chest, twisting and curling like living smoke. All the equipment in the room screeched and shattered. The wall behind her cracked open and a voice rang out. "No need for speakers or amplifiers. I've been waiting for so long, Creator." The control center was bathed in the red hue of the alarm. Inside the sealed room, the scientists were running in panic. The main screen displayed a single line. Gate 2 opened. Host unstable. Entity awakening in the glass-walled room where Jenna had collapsed. Black smoke swirled around her. She let out a dry laugh, a smile devoid of any humanity. "I was the vessel. Now I am the gate." The voice came from Jenna's mouth, but it seemed to originate from another dimension. The glass of the holding chamber shattered into pieces. Ancient symbols, not belonging to any language Jenna had ever seen, began to appear on the floor and walls. The elderly man in the room, Dr. Larkin, fell to his knees, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "No, it's not possible. The sealing ritual isn't finished. The Faceless One cannot escape." Jenna turned her head. Her eyes were no longer human. They were two swirling voids, inside which the images of screaming souls were reflected. "Do you think imprisoning me for 30 years is enough, Creator?" Boom! An explosion of energy ripped through the third basement level of the facility. Black smoke poured out like living liquid, crawling down the hallways, swallowing each person in its path amid the screams. Michael, several buildings away, felt a strange vibration. He rushed to the old jeep, his hands trembling as he inserted the key. "I can't believe it. She really is the vessel. I fell in love with a monster." "No, She's human, but something's been keeping her trapped inside. He spoke to himself, trying to maintain his sanity. Meanwhile, Jenna, or the entity within her, began to step outside. Each step caused the floor to crack open, and the dim light turned pitch black. She reached the center hall of the facility. All cameras and electronic devices were completely destroyed, but a group of people still watched through a one-way mirror. The Omega leadership, a silver-haired woman, wearing glasses, whispered softly, "It's time to activate the Genesis chamber. No more choices." In Utah, hundreds of miles away, the massive natural stone columns began to tremble slightly. Beneath the earth, 12 ancient stone doors, thought to seal the ancient children, began to glow faintly. An ancient voice rose, echoing, "In the dreams of sensitive children across America, the gatekeeper has awakened. The first will be forgotten by name, and the last will have no body left to bury." Jenna raised her hands to the sky, as if waiting for something from above. A scream erupted from her mouth, a sound beyond the range of any human could make. Glass shattered, human ears ruptured, dogs howled, birds fell dead from the sky. Dr. Larkin crawled closer to a control panel. He placed his fingerprint, whispering, "Activate the black code. Call in the Exilium team. Eliminate her before it's too late." The man on the other side of the screen, a man with a large scar on his face, nodded. Double quotes, "What about you?" "I'll stay. I created this demon. I'll be the one to die with it, if needed." But in that moment, Jenna looked through the screen. She smiled. A smile so cold it sent chills down the spine. "Stop calling me her. She died the moment you branded the number 13 onto her neck." Mojave Desert, northern Nevada, 3A.M. Michael parked the car in front of an abandoned wooden house, standing alone amidst the dust and dry cacti. The decaying sign in front read, "Temporary Archaeological Station, Black Sun Project, 1986. He opened the door. The hinges creaked. The scent of burnt wood and rotting paper wafted out. Inside, a basement room was sealed off with cement and barbed wire. However, something compelled him. He felt memories that weren't his, echoing in his head. Michael used a crowbar to break the lock. The basement revealed itself filled with file boxes, old equipment, hand-drawn maps, and a leather-bound notebook wrapped in copper chains. He opened it. The first page showed a woman standing in a circle of fire, her eyes wide, arms raised, exactly like the image of Jenna he had just seen on the camera. Handwritten in red ink, "Last Priestess, -1745, Keeper of the Secret, burned alive for sealing the gate." Michael quickly flipped through the pages. Each page revealed a slice of memory that didn't belong to this era. Ancient rituals in a language long extinct, a hidden tribe that once existed in Utah, known as the Moonkeepers, tasked with sealing entities from beyond the veil of night. A young woman with black hair, eyes like Jenna's, was the last to perform the ritual to prevent Gate 2 from opening. The successor of the bloodline will know themselves when they hear the call from the darkness. Michael froze. He recalled the moment he touched Jenna and felt an electric charge run through him. He remembered when he was young, dreaming of standing amidst fire, surrounded by an unknown language, and a voice calling his name in a strange tongue. He pulled his shirt up. On his back there was a small circular birthmark, surrounded by 3 dots matching the symbol in the book. "No way. I carried the bloodline of that priestess." Michael stumbled back, whispering. Suddenly, an old recording automatically played in the room. "If you're hearing this tape, then the entity has awakened. You are the last to carry the bloodline pure enough to repeat the sealing ritual. But be careful. If the ritual fails, you will die with it, and the gate will never close again." Outside, lightning split the sky of the desert. The sand swirled into a dust storm. Michael gripped the notebook, his eyes set with determination. "I have to save her, not just for the world, but because Jenna is still somewhere inside that monster." Cut 2. Research Facility. Genoa. The entity inside stood in the middle of the main control room. The ground cracked open with rifts. A spatial vortex began to form at the ceiling, pulling everything around it toward the center. The team, a group of special soldiers in silver armor, entered. The commander shouted, "Don't let the vortex expand. She is Neogata, living gate. Lock the target with red frequency waves." But Jenna turned round. With just one glance, the entire Exilium team was lifted into the air and turned to ash. You think weapons can fight time? The voice echoed everywhere, though it was unclear where it came from. Back to Michael, he loaded supplies into the car. The ritual circle, his own blood, kerosene, and a silver moon-shaped talisman heirloom he once thought was just an antique. The tape played one last time. Don't try to kill, try to remove. That is the one you love, Michael whispered. Jenna, I'm here to bring you back. The old research center, Nevada, near dawn. Michael walked through the cracked hallway, his hands tightly gripping the leather notebook and the silver amulet. Everywhere, there was dried blood, distorted corpses, and flickering machinery emitting a red glow. He took a deep breath. The smell of ozone, metal, and bone-chilling cold mixed together. The air seemed to whisper in an ancient language, one that only those of priestly blood could understand. The steel door to the ritual chamber, where all signals ceased, was slightly ajar. Inside, Jenna, standing with her back turned, amidst a flickering circle of fire. Her hair flowed backward, though there was no wind. She wore a charred white dress, her eyes glowing purple. She was no longer the Jenna he knew. Michael stepped closer. Jenna, if you're still in there, listen to me. I'm Michael, the one who saved you from the fire at Crescent Valley. Do you remember? The voice from Jenna came, layered with two sounds, one of her own, and the other, cold and empty. Michael, it's too late. You shouldn't have come. She is no longer yours. She chose me, forever. Michael took another step. His hands trembled, but his gaze remained unwavering. If you chose it, then let me hear you say it with your own mouth. Jenna turned around. In an instant, her glowing purple eyes turned brown, filled with tears. She trembled and whispered, "Run." Michael, I can't hold it back anymore. It's opening the gate. At that moment, the entire room shook. The walls cracked open, and a massive black light erupted from beneath Jenna's feet, like an eye opening. From the crack, long, pale hands, like twisted roots, emerged. Grabbing Michael, he pulled out the silver amulet and shouted in the ancient tongue, Ilianar, Solis, bind the darkness. White light erupted from the amulet, incinerating the hands to ashes. Jenna recoiled, screaming in agony, clutching her head. The entity inside her was tearing at her. Michael moved forward, drawing a knife and slashing his hand, letting the blood drip onto the floor. If this blood is the key, then use it to break the chains. He stepped into the circle of fire, where the temperature should have burned a normal person alive. Jenna looked at him, her eyes filled with both pleading and bloodlust. You don't understand. If the gate closes, I'll die with it. Michael choked on his words. If we don't do this, you'll kill the entire world, the entity roared. The space behind Jenna began to pull everything around it in. A spear of light formed from Michael's blood, as if summoned from his very soul. Jenna, or the entity, lunged at Michael, her eyes blazing. He raised the spear, but his hand shook. I'm sorry, Jenna. Swish. He didn't stab her directly. Instead, he drove the spear into the ground. Blood splattered. A silver glow erupted, blocking the vortex. The gates stopped opening. Jenna screamed, collapsed, her body convulsing. Violently, a stream of black smoke poured from her mouth, screeching and vanishing. Silence. Michael slumped to the floor, panting heavily. Jenna lay motionless. He pulled her into his arms, whispering, I kept my promise. I didn't kill you. Never will. 1 week later, underground military hospital in Utah. The soft yellow light filtered through a small window in the hospital room. Michael sat by Jenna's bed, gently holding her hand. She was still weak. Her pulse was stable, but she hadn't spoken much since waking up. Her eyes seemed as if they hadn't fully returned. Michael, however, was different. Every night, he dreamt of the black vortex, twisted gray hands, and seeing Jenna consumed once again. The military psychologist had once warned him, spiritual trauma syndrome. People like you often see cracks in reality, and sometimes they reopen. Michael chuckled bitterly. I know, I just didn't think. We had locked them all. That night, Jenna suddenly opened her eyes. Sweat soaked her forehead. She looked around. Michael was nowhere to be seen. Only the research notes from Nevada sat on the chair. The last page had Michael's handwritten note. If you're reading this, it means I've descended to basement 3. I believe there's still another gate, buried under the earth, and it's sending out a signal. Basement 3A, top secret research facility, deep underground in Utah. Michael silently walked down the rusty hallway. The electrical system was only partially functional. The lights flickered, the space was filled with dust and the scent of burnt material. He unfolded a 3D map and projected it onto the wall using an old device. At the center of the mapper section was marked, redacted, not found in any official documents. A heavy metal door awaited. On it was the symbol he had seen. In Jenna's adoptive father's Junala, symbol from an ancient European cult of the 12th century. Gate 1, he muttered. This wasn't the gate where Jenna had been sacrificed. This one was bigger, older, and still active. The door opened. A spiral staircase led down and down endlessly. The deeper he went, the colder the temperature became. His breath forming thin clouds of mist. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blood. He stopped when he reached the enormous altar room, where in the center of the floor was a circle drawn with dried blood, and an immobile creature lying in the centerette looked human, but not quite. Its body was pale, unnaturally tall. Eyes tightly shut, and on its forehead was the same mark Jenna had had when she was possessed. Michael pulled out a recorder. March 11th. This is Subject 0. All records have been deleted from the system, but this organism does not decay, it does not decompose. It is waiting for something. He suddenly stepped back. In the air, there was something whispering unintelligible. Then, the creature's eyes snapped open, empty, filled with nothing but whites. A voice echoed in Michael's head. You freed her. Now, it's my turn. At the exact same moment, Military Hospital. Jenna jolted awake. Blood flowed from her nose. She saw it. Michael screaming within the blood circle. Not in a dream, but directly, as if her mind was being pulled there. As night fell over the prison once more, the air seemed to thicken. The sky was covered by a thin layer of dust, and the moonlight filtered dimly through the bars of the window in cell 11. Jim sat quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes lost, staring into the empty space as though searching for something that didn't exist. In his hands was a carefully folded piece of old paper, the map Sam had left behind. No one in the prison knew that Jim was quietly plotting his escape. But for him, it wasn't just about fleeing. He needed to uncover the truth. The things he had heard, the shadowy figures that appeared in the night, and the eerie sensation that someone or something was watching him every second. The doors that locked yet opened on their own, the solitary footsteps behind him, the cold breath in the middle of summer. It couldn't just be coincidence. That night, Jim decided to leave his cell. He swapped the guard's schedule and used a makeshift wire to pick the lock. Everything went smoother than he expected. Outside, the hallways were pitch black, with only a few flickering fluorescent lights on the verge of going out. Jim moved quietly, each step as if treading on an invisible mist. His destination was the basement, once a storage area, now sealed off for over 20 years after a mysterious incident no one spoke of. According to Sam's map, there was a small room marked with a strange symbol, a circle with an upside-down cross in the center. Jim didn't know what it meant, but his instincts told him that the key to all the secrets lay inside that room. As Jim descended the cold stone stairs leading into the basement, he suddenly heard a low murmur coming from below. It wasn't the sound of people. It wasn't exactly wind either. It sounded like an ancient chant in a language he had never heard before. His heart raced, but instead of retreating, Jim took another step. For now, he was sure he had come to the edge of something very big and very dark. The rusty, heavy metal door leading to the old basement creaked and groaned as Jim pushed it open. There was no lock, no bolt. The door seemed to have been waiting for him all these years. Inside was a round room, its walls covered in strange symbols drawn with black charcoal and dried blood. In the center of the room stood a stone table, covered in the dust of time, but strangely, a portion of the center of the table was inexplicably clean, as if something had just been placed there, and then vanished. Jim stepped inside, each footfall echoing deeply from the stone floor below. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered wildly before shutting off completely. In the total darkness, he felt a cold breath brush his neck, so cold that it made his spine contract instinctively. And then, the whispers started again. At first, they were disjointed, unintelligible sounds, But only a few seconds later, they grew clearer, deeper, like a voice coming from inside his own head. "You're too late. Like all the others before you, ... Jim turned his head, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one. Only the symbols on the walls seemed to be moving, slowly rotating, as if they were living beings looking back at him. Double quotes. "Sam, ... did you ... come here too?" Jim mumbled, his trembling hand touching the stone table. The moment his hand touched it, the entire room lit up with a fiery red light, not blinding, but like a flickering flame rising from deep within the earth. The symbols began to glow, shifting from black to bright red, then gradually morphing into images like a reversed film. A man being dragged through a hallway, Sam behind him, a large, dark, formless entity, with only two glowing red eyes piercing through the imagined screen. Jim fell back, gasping for breath, sweat pouring down like rain. But he understood now. This was not just a prison. It was a place holding something ancient, evil, and unnamed, and somehow Sam had touched it and vanished. Now, Jim knew that if he wanted to survive and if there was still hope of finding Sam, he had to go deeper into this nightmare. There was no turning back now. Jim stood there, breathing heavily. The eerie red light from the symbols on the walls flickered like demonic eyes. His heart pounded, as though it were about to burst from his chest. He knew, from the moment his hand touched the stone table, the world he had entered was no longer the old one. It was no longer a place governed by reason or rules. It was a space bent and twisted by dark history and something older than humanity itself. The exit behind the room opened into another corridor, smaller, winding, and pitch black. The jagged stone walls were damp, the air thick with the stench of rust and dried blood. Jim moved forward, only the weak light of his lighter guiding him. His shoes splashed in the thin layer of water that had gathered on the floor, each step echoing in the deathly silence. With each step, the pressure of the air felt more suffocating, as though he were descending into the depths of the ocean, where every sound was swallowed by the darkness. Then a noise came from behind, clack ... like footsteps dragging along the stone floor. Jim turned around, holding the lighter behind him, but saw nothing except the crumbling wall. He quickened his pace, his heart hammering in panic. The corridor ended at an old wooden door, which seemed to have once been a cell door, but had been altered. The door was carved with bizarre symbols, figures without faces, kneeling before a towering creature with dozens of arms spread out like a spider's web. Jim hesitated. A faint screech echoed from behind him, urging him forward. He pushed the door open. Inside was another room, smaller, with a lower ceiling, but it felt ... much colder. Hanging in the center was a mirror, without a frame, just a large pane of glass floating in midair. As Jim stepped inside, the mirror didn't reflect his image, but Sam's, his face pale, eyes sunken deep, staring at Jim as though trying to scream something. "Sam, is that you?" Jim yelled, but the image didn't move, like a corpse frozen in time. It wasn't until Jim reached out to touch the mirror's surface that Sam's image dissolved into droplets of blood, which slowly flowed upward, dripping across the ceiling. Jim recoiled. The air in the room was so cold, his breath formed into mist. And then, a fractured whisper emerged from the stone walls. "Don't search for him anymore. He has been chosen. ... Now, it's your turn." Jim stood frozen. The voice echoing in his head came from an unclear source, but it was as clear as if someone were whispering right behind his neck. Cold sweat ran down his spine. He had been chosen, Sam, and now, your turn. The room suddenly shook slightly, as if an earthquake had passed. The bloodstains that had spread across the mirror now turned into bright red symbols, burning on their own. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, making Jim cough violently. He turned around to charge out of the room, but the door vanished. Only a cold stone wall blocked his way. No way out. Jim spun around. The wall on his left began to move, but not because it was shifting. It was as if the stones on the wall were protruding, forming human faces. Dozens of faces distorted without eyes, mouths wide open as if screaming in silence. Some of the faces still bore scratch marks, as though they had tried to crawl out. In his panic, Jim backed away and accidentally stepped on a strange stone slab. The mirror from before suddenly flared up again. This time, it wasn't Sam, was him. but not his current self. It was Jim, from the future. No, it was another Jim. Bald eyes black with no pupils, chest covered in scars, standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by dark entities like smoke, hissing in rhythm. The image reached out its hand, and future Jim spoke. "You've stepped into it, Jim. There's no turning back now." And at that moment, a cold hand shot up from beneath the stone floor, grabbing Jim by the ankle. He screamed, thrashing wildly, trying to shake off whatever was grabbing him. But the hand wasn't trying to pull him down, it was offering him something. Jim looked more closely. It was a broken piece of a police badge, split in two, covered in dried blood. Engraved on it was a faint inscription: Warden J. Keller, the name of the prison warden, who was rumored to have disappeared decades ago in this very prison. Jim grabbed it, and immediately the whole room shook violently. The screeching, howling sound came from all directions, not whispers anymore. It was ... hatred, a demand. The souls trapped here were awakening then. A crack opened in the wall ahead of him, not leading to freedom, but to a tunnel descending into the earth. Jim had no choice. Stay here, where both reality and souls were twisted, or move forward. He swallowed hard, his eyes flashing with determination. Then stepped down. The tunnel stretched endlessly, swallowing Jim with every step. The light from the flashlight in his hand flickered, unable to illuminate more than 3 steps ahead. The air was thick, smelling rancid, like rotting flesh mixed with rusted metal. The stone walls on either side gradually turned black, as if scorched, and occasionally, deep claw marks appeared, as if someone had tried to climb up from the bottom. Jim held his breath as he continued. Each step down echoed with a cold, hollow sound. Not quite his own footsteps, but as though someone was walking alongside him, matching his pace. Then he stopped when he realized the light ahead. A room opened up, with a high vaulted ceiling, perhaps once a basement built during the Civil War. The walls were covered with ancient symbols, not ordinary religious markings. It was something no one knew of in the real world. A circle drawn in dried blood lay in the center of the floor, surrounded by dozens of human bones arranged in a spiral. Jim cautiously stepped in. The air here was chilling, as if dipped in ice. As he approached the blood circle, a stream of black mist escaped, like fog, but thick and aware of its movements. Then, it appeared. From inside the circle, a creature crawled out, its body long and serpentine, but with a human head, no eyes, and a mouth wide open, stretching from ear to ear. Its breath whispered in many voices at once. Old and young, male and female, the souls it had consumed now spoke for it. Jim instinctively stepped back, but the room wouldn't allow it. The doors vanished. The symbols on the walls began to glow a fiery red, and the creature raised its head, gliding towards Jim without the need for legs. Each of its words screamed in his mind like metal scraping his brain. "You bear the mark of the betrayer. You are the one who opened the gate. We've waited. Waited for you to arrive at the right moment. Jim trembled, retreating until his back hit the wall. Suddenly, in his pocket, the blood-soaked badge from earlier began to glow faintly. The creature screeched and recoiled slightly. Jim grabbed the badge and held it in front of him. With pure instinct, he rushed towards the circle. Throwing the badge into the center of the blood, an invisible explosion swept through the room. The creature shrieked, curling up as though being burned alive. But the scream wasn't just one of pain, it was one of fury. Because the gate had not yet opened fully, Jim collapsed, his breath ragged. Inside the center of the circle, the creature had vanished, but Jim knew it hadn't gone anywhere. It had just been pushed back, until the next time. Jim gasped for breath, his back pressed against the cold stone wall. As the final scream of the entity faded into the darkness, there was no more light from the badge, only the thick, impenetrable darkness that enveloped everything. But then, the wall behind him seemed to melt away. A narrow path opened up low and cramped, with the smell of rotting wood mixed with old blood filling the air. He crawled through, dragging himself on his hands, the flashlight flickering, until he bumped into something hard. An old wooden door sealed with red wax. On it was an inscription in Latin: Mortem non est finis. Death is not the end. Jim hesitated, but then he pushed the door open. Behind it was a small room, like an office once occupied by someone who had worked here. There was a wooden desk, a swivel chair covered in dust, and a shelf full of files. On the desk, a kerosene lamp automatically lit up as he entered. The light cast a pale yellow glow onto a stack of papers labeled Project Eden, Confidential. Jim shakily opened it. Inside were records, images, and detailed reports about prisoners who had disappeared at Cold Creek facility. But the horrifying truth was none of the prisoners had been transferred. They had been chosen to undergo experiments to link with a real-world entity the military called Entity X. This entity requires a host. The more negative emotions, fear, anger, despair it feeds on, the stronger it becomes. Cold Creek is the ideal testing ground. Jim choked as he flipped to the last page, an old black and white photo, with the name of the project's lead supervisor written clearly, James Connolly. Below it was a note, disappeared with the first group, body never found. Jim froze. That was his father's name. His heart raced as he continued searching through the shelf and found a journal belonging to a military psychologist. Inside, it contained this passage: James Connolly did not die. Hitchie opened the gate first. He was possessed by the entity's soul, but not fully. Cold Creek was the trap not for the prisoners, but for him, and for those with his bloodline. Jim dropped the journal, his body cold with shock. His whole life, he had believed his father went missing in the war. Now he understood. He hadn't been brought here by chance. Everything from the sentence, being transferred to Cold Creek, to the nightmares that had haunted his childhood was part of a bigger plan. He was the final link. Jim stood still, his body numb from what he had just read. The name James Connolly, no longer just a fading memory of a missing father, but now, the center of a nightmare coming to life. The door behind him slammed shut without being touched, as if the place had come alive and was watching him. Footsteps, not an illusion, not the wind, something, was coming closer. Jim grabbed the stack of files, shoved them into his jacket, and turned to run. The hallway ahead was pitch black, but his instincts told him there was no turning back. He raced down the opposite path, following a cobbled passage covered in dust and cobwebs. The flashlight flickered, illuminating the walls, revealing charcoal drawings, hundreds of distorted human figures, crushed and suffocated beneath black claws. A swirling symbol repeated itself, resembling a gate, opening suddenly. Kiet, a high-pitched metallic screech echoed from deep in the hallway. Jim held his breath, turning to look, but saw nothing. The sound didn't resemble a door opening. It sounded like something was crawling, dragging its enormous metal body across the floor. He shuddered and kept running, his hand brushing against a rusted door latch. He pushed it open. On the other side was a circular, ruined room, once a special holding cell, but now it resembled a grotesque shrine. In the center of the floor was a burnt, magical circle with iron spikes piercing a skull. A stone statue stood tall in the middle of the room, a faceless creature with dozens of small arms sprouting from its back. Jim instinctively stepped back, but then the circle began to glow. Odd symbols like blood flowing backward began to appear around the edge of the floor. A whisper echoed, not from his throat, but inside his head. The one with the Connolly blood has arrived at the right time. Jim screamed, pounding his head, trying to block out the sound. But the more he resisted, the clearer it became. The gatekeeper has chosen you. You cannot run. You are the bridge, the end, and the beginning. His vision blurred. The room spun. Blood leaked from his nose. Then suddenly, a shrill beep cut through. Jim opened his eyes. Red warning lights were flashing. The steel door on the right suddenly swung open. Cold wind rushing in. Another corridor. And at the end, daylight. Real light. Was it an escape? Jim didn't think anymore. He screamed, running like a madman, leaving all the sounds behind. The ghostly laughter, the whispering voices, and the fear at the end. There was hope, or another trap. Jim ran down the hallway as if hell itself was rising behind him. He collapsed in front of the metal door that was wide open, and when he looked up, his heart almost stopped. What lay before him was no longer the ruined prison. It was a perfect, vibrant Cold Creek town. But strange, the sun gently cast light onto the wooden houses with steep roofs, bakery signs, barbershops, and an old-fashioned movie theater. Everything looked as if it had stepped out of a 1950s photograph. No modern cars, no phones, just horse-drawn carts, and the sound of an old radio echoing from open windows. Jim stood up and turned to look back at the steel door behind him, but it had disappeared. Only a grey brick wall remained, as if the passage had never existed. He looked around. Everything was too quiet. A woman in an ivory-colored flared dress walked by, holding a basket of bread. She glanced at Jim, his clothes tattered, face smeared with blood and dirt, with an empty look. "You don't belong here," she said softly, her voice monotone. Jim froze. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" The woman didn't respond. She walked on as if she had never stopped. But that sentence echoed in Jim's head like an alarm bell. The dizzy feeling began to return. He looked around. People were starting to turn and look at him, not out of curiosity, but with looks that knew. A little boy sitting in front of the ice cream shop giggled, but his laughter echoed as if from a broken tape recorder. His eyes were hollow, like two bottomless pits. Jim stepped back, bumping into a streetlight. It was an old, worn-out poster. "Welcome to Cold Creek, 1953. Beneath it was a scrawled note written in black ink. "We never left." Jim's heart pounded in his chest. He walked quickly, trying to avoid the strange gazes from the townspeople, but with each step, he felt like someone was following him. At the end of the street, there was a small tavern, the Hollow Oak Tavern. The sign creaked in the wind. Jim opened the door, hoping to find someone normal, but the interior was dark. No music, no sound. There was only one person sitting, waiting. "You've seen the light, but the light here is a loop." The man, grey hair, deeply hollow eyes, stood up. The light from the oil lamp cast his face in shadow. Jim recognized an eerie familiarity, though he couldn't place it. "You know who I am, don't you, James?" "No way, ... Dad." Jim stumbled back, his voice trembling. The air in the tavern was freezing, even though the sunlight was still gently shining on the old street outside. Jim stared at the man in front of him, a thin figure, graying hair, but the eyes, they were exactly like his father's. "No, my father is dead. I buried him with my own hands." The man smirked, as if smiling without actually smiling. Death doesn't mean an end, son. Here, no one truly leaves." Jim stepped back, a cold chill running down his spine. His hand gripped the wooden bar, searching for something to hold on to. "Who are you? If you're not my father, then what are you?" The man stepped closer, his voice deep and resonant, as if echoing from a deep pit. "I am what remains. The memory, the guilt, the nightmare of him, and of you." Jim looked deep into his eyes, and an image flashed in his mind like a lightning bolt. His father, in military uniform, kneeling before a stone altar, blood dripping from his hands onto the floor. Other soldiers chanting something in an ancient language, eyes rolled back, mouths full of blood. A roar from deep within the earth. Then a fiery red light erupted like a volcano. Jim screamed, clutching his head. No, you said it was just an intelligence mission. My father never told me about this." The man tilted his head. He tried to hide it, but a failed ritual cannot be buried forever. This town, it's sealed, not by the land, but by blood and guilt. Jim trembled. "Why am I here? I'm not a part of this, not a part." His voice, sharp as a knife. "You are the last bloodline. You are the final link to reopen the ritual. And all of them, those souls out there, are waiting." Suddenly, the tavern shook slightly. Glasses on the shelf fell and shattered. The windows slammed shut. The lights in the room flickered, and then went out in the darkness. Only eerie green flames flickered from candles that seemed to appear from nowhere. The man stepped back into the corner of the room, fading into the night like smoke. "Run, if you want, but no matter how far you run, the ritual will still find you. And when the blood moon rises again, your blood will be the key to open the gate." Jim stood there, gasping, eyes wide, his ears ringing from the final words. He didn't know if he was dreaming, hallucinating, or being pulled into a fate that had been set before he was born. Jim ran out of the tavern as if being chased by a ghost. His breath was rapid, his heart pounding like a drum. He didn't dare look back. Don't stay. I'm not part of this." He jumped into the old truck, turned the key. The engine sputtered and then roared to life, as if waking up from a long sleep. Without thinking, Jim floored the gas pedal. The truck sped down Cold Creek's main road, past abandoned houses, over the old wooden bridge, and turned onto the only road leading out of town. But then, something strange happened. A rusted sign by the roadside. "Welcome to Cold Creek, a town with no time." Jim frowned. He had been driving for over 10 miles. How could it? He pressed on. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the sky turning a dull gray. The trees lining the sides stood silent like stone statues. The wind stopped blowing. No birds, no radio signal. Even the GPS on his phone went blank. A little while later, another sign. "Welcome to Cold Creek EST, 1867. Jim gripped the steering wheel tightly. Sweat trickled down his temples. This can't be. I've been driving straight. I haven't turned back. How could I be back in town? He slammed the accelerator, eyes wide as if losing his mind. The scenery along the road began to repeat. The abandoned gas station, the rusted police car, a dead black bird on a telephone pole. Every detail identical, like a film rewinding over and over. And then, the truck jerked to a stop. Not because it ran out of gas, not because it was broken. It stopped, as if an invisible force had commanded it. Jim opened the door, stepped out, breathing heavily. The silence was unnerving. He stood in the middle of the cold asphalt road, looking around. Behind him was Cold Creek, the sign faintly visible in the mist. In front of him, was also Cold Creek. An identical version, as if the town was duplicating itself. This can't be. This is hell. I'm stuck in a loop. From a distance, a whisper echoed, unclear whether male or female. "You can't leave, because you haven't completed your role." Jim turned abruptly. "No one," he screamed, as if to tear the silence apart. "Who am I? What do you want from me?" No one answered, only the silent wind, the emptiness. He fell to his knees in the middle of the dead-end road, trapped in the repeating town, where the past, present, and restless souls overlapped into a twisted labyrinth with no escape. Jim stood still on the quiet street. The sun was gone, replaced by a gray, misty sky, with no clear indication of day or night. The air had also changed, thick, as if he were inhaling cold smoke. He turned around, with no other choice. The car stood motionless, seemingly a part of the town now. Jim took slow, heavy steps back toward the town's gate, this time with a different mindset. No more running. "All right, Cold Creek, what do you want?" he muttered, his eyes fixed ahead at the darkening buildings slowly emerging through the fog. The town was no longer the same. The streets were twisted. The signs were distorted, as if melted. With each step, he felt like he was walking into another dimension, a reflection of reality, but warped outside the general store, which used to be silent and closed. Now, the lights were blindingly bright, but the light wasn't from electric bulbs. It was a dim, pale blue light emanating from inside jars. Jim stopped. Inside the jars were eyes, floating, blinking lightly, as if watching him. "No, I'm hallucinating." He stepped back, but each time he blinked, the streetlights changed color, from white to green, then purple, then red, as if signaling something. A door swung open. From house number 13. No one invited him, but Jim was drawn in, as if an invisible string was pulling him inside. He stepped through the threshold and froze. Inside was a dining room, a long table covered with a white cloth, set with 5 sets of silverware. The chairs were neatly arranged. Everything was clean, but there was no one until he saw himself, another version of himself, sitting at the head of the table, eyes vacant, face frozen. What the hell? Jim stepped back, but when he turned around, the door was gone. He turned back. The other version of him stood up. No words, no movement of the lips, but a voice echoed inside Jim's head. "You're the guest, but soon, you will be the master." Jim raised his hand, intending to touch the figure, but it dissolved into black smoke, engulfing the room. He panicked, struggled, then opened his eyes, to find himself standing back in the town, at the main intersection, as if he had never left. "No, this can't be. I was just in that house." But there was no house number 13 anymore, just an empty patch of land, covered in dead grass. Jim stood in the middle of the town's intersection, his heart racing. But this time, instead of running, he crouched down beneath his feet. Something strange. A circle was faintly carved into the cracked asphalt. Inside the circle was a tangled symbol, like some ancient script or an image resembling an eye, but distorted, angular. I've never seen this before, or have I? He took a few steps back and jumped in surprise when he realized it was everywhere. On the old shop door, on the brick wall, on even the windshield of his car. Each place had a different variant, as if they were evolving layer by layer of memory. Jim suddenly remembered the dreams. Recently, he kept dreaming of himself, standing in the middle of a circle of people wearing black cloaks. The chanting, in an unintelligible language, always repeated one name. Verzegel. He had thought it was just a nightmare. What is Verzegel? A person? An entity? No one answered. A gust of wind blew by. Jim saw in the distance the old Cold Creek Church, a large grey stone structure, abandoned since the 1950s. The front door was wide open, the steps covered in dry leaves leading up, ... almost like an invitation. Inside, the pews were covered in dust. The cross still stood, but Christ had been replaced by something else, a creature with horns, 4 eyes, and charred wings. What happened here? ... Jim shakily moved closer to the altar. There was an old leather-bound book lying in the center. When he touched it, a jolt shot through him immediately. The sound of screaming echoed in his mind. He opened the first page. The handwriting, brown ink like dried blood. Ritual of Awakening. Last performed on November 13th, 1944. Only those of the Verzegel bloodline may be summoned. Jim gasped. What had they done in this town? He flipped through a few more pages. Drawings of summoning circles, sacrificial rituals, and a list of participants. At the end of the list, the ink was smudged but still legible. James Holloway. Jim fell backward. That was his grandfather's name. No. It can't be. He never told me. He never said anything about Cold Creek. But when Jim stood up, on his left arm was the birthmark of the symbol he had seen on the street. And at that moment, the church bell rang again, though the bell had clearly been gone. Jim stumbled out of the church, cold sweat soaking his shirt. The sky was grayer than usual, and the wind blew sharp like a knife. The lingering sound of the false bell still echoed in his ears. James Holloway. My grandfather. The awakening. Ritual. Am I dreaming? But when Jim closed his eyes to take a deep breath, everything collapsed. He was no longer standing in the middle of Cold Creek. Before him now was an empty field, with hundreds of people in black robes standing in a circle. In the center of the ground, a young man was tightly bound to a wooden post, surrounded by strange flames burning brightly without smoke. Jim smelled blood, the smell of burning flesh. His heart pounded so fast, it felt suffocating. He couldn't control his body. He turned his head as if someone else was controlling him and saw his own face in the crowd of black robes. That's me. No. It can't be. Jim realized he was reliving his grandfather's memory. But the strange thing was he felt every emotion, every sensation, the excitement, the fear, and a dark sense of pleasure as the victim's screams rang out. It's not me. It's not me. Boom. A lightning bolt struck across the sky, shattering the illusion. Jim collapsed in the middle of the road, drenched in sweat. He looked around now. The town was no longer desolate. It had shifted into another reality. The ruined houses seemed to come back to life. The lights were on. People walked by, but their faces were hollow, with no eyes, no mouths. Jim stepped back and bumped into someone. The person looked at him with a blank, lifeless face and whispered, "Verzegel has chosen you. The bloodline has awakened." Jim screamed and turned to run, but every road now led nowhere. The old paths vanished, replaced by stone walls, cliffs, and living symbols squirming like creatures. He ran on Peacher until he found himself standing before a full-length mirror, placed in the middle of the square. In the mirror there wasn't him. It was his grandfather James Holloway, with eyes as black as coal, and a long cut on his wrist. Everything must be repeated. You are the final link. Then the image vanished. Jim collapsed, panicking, unable to tell what was real and what was illusion. Jim tried to push himself up from the ground, but his legs felt as if they were glued to the cold stone floor. His entire body trembled, as though he had a fever, while the veins beneath his skin darkened, as if something was moving inside. He felt like he was no longer himself. "No, I can't. I won't let it take over me." Suddenly, a sharp pain shot from his spine up to his brain. Jim screamed in desperation. In that moment, his mind split in two. One half was Jim, panicking, and the other half was a strange, deep, ancient voice echoing in his head. "Vizegel is not forgotten. The one with the last bloodline is you." In the blink of an eye, he saw images of hundreds of people, familiar faces from the town, bound and sacrificed. His grandfather stood in the center of a ritual circle, holding a blood-soaked knife, and now Jim was holding that knife in a place exactly like the underground chamber he had never entered. This isn't real, it can't be. But the surroundings had indeed changed. Jim was standing in an ancient tomb. The stone walls covered with moss and dried blood symbols glowed red on the rock face, moving slowly as though breathing. He couldn't remember how he had gotten here. In his hand, the rusted knife was still dripping with blood. Jim trembled. Looking down at his feet lay the corpse of a man, his heart ripped out. He stepped back, screaming, but no one could. Here, there was no echo, no way out. "No, I didn't do this. I'm not Vizegel." Suddenly, the stone walls cracked open, as if something was awakening inside. A pair of red eyes appeared from the darkness, floating in midair, and then a voice echoed throughout the space. "You have opened the door. There is no turning back." Jim screamed, driving the knife into the ground. A burst of light exploded, engulfing him. He was back in the square, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, but the feeling of no longer being himself still clung to him. A faceless child appeared in front of him, grabbing his hand and speaking in a grown-up voice. "The awakening has only just begun. The night of the blood purge is coming. You are the final sacrifice." Jim collapsed, his consciousness fading. Before, it had been the town, then the ritual, then his own body. Now, his mind was melting away. Jim jolted awake in the thick, oppressive darkness, his breath shallow and ragged. But this time, he was no longer in the square, nor could he see the streetlights or the old wooden houses. He was lying in the Cold Creek Cemetery. The sky was torn apart by blood-red lightning, illuminating hundreds of ancient graves that were slowly shifting. The stone tombstones tilted, the ground beneath his feet cracked open, and from below ... rotting arms began to reach up. Double quotes, "No ... this can't be real ... Jim staggered to his feet, his body now freezing, not from the night wind, but because something was alive inside him. He could clearly feel the heartbeat. It wasn't his own, but something else's. In his mind, the ancient voice echoed again, this time clearer. "You are the heir, the sacrifice, and the one who offers the sacrifice. Let me complete the ritual." He clutched his head, screaming, trying to escape the voice, but the images came rushing in like a tsunami. From centuries ago, his ancestors, the Cold Creek men, had made a pact with the dark entity VAR, single quotes EZHUL, in exchange for prosperity. They had to sacrifice the blood of their own bloodline, regularly, every generation. And now, Jim was the last. Before him, a stone coffin swung open. Inside, there was no body, but a black mirror like water. Jim looked into it, and saw himself, but not his own reflection. The reflection in the mirror was smiling, eyes glowing red, teeth long and sharp like razor blades. It raised a hand to touch the mirror, and from it, a black arm like ash reached out, pulling Jim in. "No, I'm not a monster." Jim struggled hopelessly, but then, boom. A thunderous explosion shook the cemetery. A blue flame erupted in the distance from Cold Creek's old church. From afar, a figure in a black cloak stood amidst the fire, holding up an ancient silver cross. His voice echoed, "Jim, there's still time. Go to the church. Don't let him control you." Jim staggered toward it, the sound of bones cracking behind him as corpses rose from the earth. Ahead of him was a faint hope, the only place not yet consumed by darkness. Jim ran through the night like a madman. With every step, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble with the sound of dry bones crawling behind him. The corpses from the cemetery were rising, no longer sluggish like the usual zombies, crawled like spiders, screaming silently, growls echoing from their empty throats. The road from the cemetery to the church was no longer familiar. The trees now seemed to be haunted, their branches twisting together like claws, and the black fog clung tightly to the ground. Everything seemed to be trying to swallow him. The blue flame in the distance was the only thing he could see clearly, a tiny light in the cold hell. Every time he looked back, the darkness seemed to draw nearer, covering all traces. "Don't look back. Keep running, Jim." A voice echoed in his mind. Jim stumbled and fell. Blood gushed from his knee as he tried to get back up. The pain brought him back to reality, but only for a moment, because right next to him, a faceless figure appeared in the bushes, leaning close to his ear and whispering, "You will never escape. Verzegel lives within you." A thunderclap rang out. The entire sky of Cold Creek seemed to be torn apart. The wind howled from all directions. But then, something strange happened. Jim reached the border between the cemetery and the church, and darkness stopped. It was like an invisible barrier, the dark entities unable to pass. In front of him stood the Cold Creek church, now smoldering, but not in ruins. The black stone walls seemed enchanted, the high arching ceiling reaching through the sky, and at the front door, a man in a black cloak was waiting. The man removed his hood, revealing an aged yet radiant face. A priest. His eyes were deep as abysses, but held a strange glimmer of light. "You've arrived. Just in time, Jim," he said. "I am Father Merrick, the keeper of the final promise." Jim gasped, trying to regain his composure, but his throat felt tight with bitterness. "You know what's happening to me, don't you? He is inside me." Father Merrick nodded, slowly stepping down the stairs. He held out a silver necklace with an upside-down star pendant, but one corner was broken. "Verzegel cannot be destroyed by faith, but it can be severed if you dare to face it." Inside the church, an ancient stone door was slightly open, red, blood-like light spilling out from it. The space trembled, and Jim understood. The real battle had just begun. The stone door slammed shut behind Jim with a resounding sound like a death knell. The red light dimmed, giving way to a cold and gloomy space. The walls around him were no longer made of brick or stone. They were layers of grey, human skin, etched with ancient symbols, flickering weakly like a heartbeat. The air was thick with the scent of ashes, old blood, and something like burnt sulfur. Each step Jim took echoed loudly, not because of the sound, but because the space here reflected his fear. Father Merrick walked ahead, holding a rusty silver staff with a dragon's head, mumbling ancient chants in a forgotten tongue. Jim silently followed, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is where we sealed him, ... Merrick whispered. "Verzegel is not a demon. He is the rejected concept, a buildup of centuries of hatred, betrayal, and sin." Jim shuddered. Along the sides of the hallway were twisted statues, as if they were screaming, as if they had once been living beings, petrified at the moment they witnessed something horrific. One of them, ... Jim recognized. It was his adoptive father, Mr. Taylor. "No, ... it can't be." Father Merrick did not turn around, only speaking. "Verzegel doesn't kill. He absorbs memories, forms, and leaves behind shells, the husks of regret." The entire space in front of them suddenly opened into a circular room. In the center was a magical circle, deep silver grooves carved into the stone floor, clearly forming a six-pointed star. Hanging above it, a shadow hovered. No ropes, no anchors, simply suspended in mid-air, as if pulled by an invisible force. The shadow had Jim's face. "He is you if you don't turn back, ... Merrick sighed. "The soul is split, Jim. One half is you, one half ... is him." Jim stepped back. The air was so cold it felt like his lungs were freezing. The whispers began to surround him. "We are one. We have always been this way. I am what you refuse to admit ... The shadow slowly turned. Its hollow black eyes stared into Jim's, and it smiled a smile identical to Jim's, but distorted and empty like a bottomless pit. There was no turning back now. Jim understood. This wasn't a fight with a demon. It was a fight with the darkest part of himself. The air in the room thickened. All sounds seemed to be sucked into the stillness, except for the voice of the shadow, whispering everywhere without moving its mouth. "You ran all the way here, just to hear me remind you of the truth you buried." The shadow began to lower itself to the ground, step by step, though it didn't touch the floor. it still left a dark trail spreading like oil, staining the ceiling matrix beneath Jim's feet. Jim stood frozen. His body couldn't move, as if it was stretched tight by invisible chains of his own fear. Father Merrick screamed, "Don't look directly into its eyes, Jim. It's pulling you into the deep, where there's no return." But it was too late. Those empty black eyes widened, and the world around Jim shattered. He was no longer standing in the church. Instead, he was in an old wooden house, filled with the stench of alcohol and cigarettes. Screams rang out. A drunk man was swinging his hand to hit his wife, then turned and grabbed Jim, who was just a 10-year-old boy at the time. "You are the fault of everything. If it weren't for you, your mother wouldn't have died." Jim flinched. His memory of that moment wasn't clear, but now it was vividly recreated, each painful detail. He screamed, "No, this isn't real." But it once was. The shadow whispered, now speaking in Jim's own voice. "I was born from that moment, from the resentment, from your inability to forgive, not forgiving others, nor yourself." The world spun again. Jim found himself on the battlefield, comrades fallen, blood splattering his face. Once again, the feeling of helplessness surged. And then, once more, Verzegel appeared. "Now, with the faces of everyone Jim had left behind, every choice you made has sown suffering. I am merely the result." It spread its arms, as if inviting him, "Come here, and let everything end." But this time, Jim didn't step back. He gripped the pendant Merrick had given him, pressing it to his chest. A blinding silver light shot out, tearing the night apart. "You are a part of me, but you do not define me." The shadow screamed, and was sucked back into the magic circle, like a whirlwind being swallowed into its own heart. The stone statues around shattered, the bloodstains evaporated. Jim collapsed, but his eyes remained fixed. Father Merrick stepped forward, supporting him. "You haven't destroyed it, but you've done what few can do. You've faced yourself." Jim lay motionless on the stone floor. The echoes of the entity's scream still reverberated faintly in the corners of the underground chamber, like ghostly whispers clinging to the air. Every nerve in his body burned, not from pain but from exhaustion, from confrontation, from truth. Father Merrick kneeled beside him, resting a trembling hand on Jim's chest. His eyes shimmered not with relief, but with something deeper, a terrible realization. "You survived, but something's changed," Merrick whispered, almost to himself. Jim blinked slowly. He wasn't sure whether he was still dreaming. The chamber was dim again, the silvery glow of the warding circle fading like embers. The silhouette that other him was gone. "For now, what was that?" Jim asked hoarsely. "A fragment," Merrick replied, "of what you were, and of what he is." As Jim slowly sat up, the walls around them began to shift, not crumble, but transform. The skin-like surface peeled away, revealing ancient inscriptions, glowing faintly in a language older than Latin, older than time itself. "This place isn't just a prison," Merrick muttered. "It's a mirror." Jim stared. The symbols told stories, not with letters, but with imagery. He saw depictions of Verzegel, not as a demon, but as a fallen guardian, once entrusted to protect the threshold between worlds. He had been betrayed, fractured, and cast into darkness. He was once one of them. Jim pointed. "The Wardens of Threshold." Merrick nodded grimly. "They called themselves the Volim. They were not angels, not demons, but the balance between, until Verzegel chose to feel anger, loss, human pain." Jim's jaw clenched. The truth rattled him more than any shadow ever could. So he was punished. For feeling, he chose vengeance. And when he did, his essence split, one half consumed by rage, the other sent through bloodlines into you. The revelation hit like a landslide. Jim stood, swaying slightly, as the realization clawed deeper into his soul. "Why me?" "Because your father was the last to touch the seal," Merrick said quietly. "He tried to unearth forbidden knowledge, and was marked, his child born with half the soul of a guardian, half the seed of a curse." Outside the chamber, a low rumble began to build. Dust fell from the ceiling. The ancient bindings were weakening. "He knows you saw the truth," Merrick warned. "He won't hide anymore. He'll come through the cracks. And this time, not as a shadow." Jim looked toward the far end of the chamber, where a spiral staircase led further down, far below the earth, deeper than the roots of any church or crypt. He clenched his fists. "Then, I go deeper. If that's where the answers are." Merrick hesitated, then followed. The spiral staircase groaned under their weight as Jim and Father Merrick descended. Each step echoed like a countdown. The further they went, the colder it became, not a physical cold, but something ancient and emotional, a vacuum of warmth that gnawed at the soul. This place wasn't meant for human feet, Merrick muttered, as the steps ended. They entered a vast underground hall, vaulted and domed, built in a style that no modern civilization had ever recorded. Black stone columns stretched to a ceiling veined with glowing cracks of red and violet. The air thrummed with a sound just beneath hearing a vibration that pulsed in their bones. "This is where they bound him," Merrick said. "Before the betrayal, before the divide." In the center of the chamber stood an altar, surrounded by ancient relics. But what caught Jim's eye was the figure chained to the far wall. A man, his arms stretched outward, wrists bound in symbols that shimmered with unnatural light. His eyes were closed, his face hauntingly familiar. "Dad," Jim whispered. Father Merrick inhaled sharply. "No, it can't be." The figure stirred. "You've come," the man rasped. "Just like they said you would." Jim stepped forward, heart racing. You really my father?" "I was," the figure said, voice hollow. "Before I touched the seal, before the knowledge infected me. Now I am ... a vessel." The man's eyes opened. One eye was his father's, warm, tired, human. The other burned with crimson fire, the same shade as the shadow Jim had faced earlier. "I held it back for as long as I could," he said, "but it's inside me now, and it's learning how to wear me better each day." Jim's voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened?" the man asked, gently. "Or would you have run, just like I did? Now it's your turn to choose, to carry it, or to end it." Suddenly, the chamber shook. Cracks snaked up the walls. From behind the altar, a low growl rose, not of an animal, but of something ancient waking from slumber. Merrick drew a small blade. "We're not alone. You can't fight it with steel," the man said. "You must confront it with truth." The growl turned into a whisper. Jim heard his name, spoken in his own voice, warped and dripping with venom. "It's coming," the man whispered, "and this time, it wears your face." The voice echoed again, this time louder, clearer, perfect mimic of Jim's own tone, yet twisted at the edges like cracked glass. "You've always been afraid. Afraid of what you could become." Jim turned slowly. From the far side of the altar, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, his silhouette. Same height, same posture, but when the light from the cracked ceiling hit its face, Jim froze. It was him, but not him. The figure's skin was pale, ashen like dried bone. Its eyes, once mirrors of Jim's, were now two pits of flickering flame. Its grin was wider, unnaturally, stretched, as if its very skin fought to contain the malice beneath. "You left me down here," the doppelganger hissed, stepping forward. "All those doubts, all those thoughts you buried. I was born from them." Father Merrick whispered behind Jim, "Don't believe it. Visegel is a parasite. It's using your image to shake you." "But I am him," the double whispered. "The part that lied, that wanted power, the part that enjoyed the chase more than the truth." The room grew darker, the violet light from the ceiling dimming as the shadow Jim grew stronger. "You abandoned your mother. You failed your team. You blamed everyone, except yourself." Jim's fists clenched. The words stung because they were true half-truths, sharpened like daggers. "I didn't come here to fight myself," he muttered. "No," the double said. "You came to become me." The figure lunged. Jim barely dodged as the shadow's claws raked across the stone, leaving scorched marks. Merrick threw a vial that exploded in a flash of silver light, forcing the thing back, but it only laughed. "Light burns me, but your shame feeds me." The air thickened. Time slowed. Jim felt as though gravity itself was pulling him toward his darker self. A force deeper than magic. It was emotional gravity, an anchor forged from years of guilt. And then, Jim remembered his father's words. "You must confront it with truth." He stopped running. Facing the shadow, he shouted, "Yes, I was afraid. I ran, I failed, but I'm still here." The doppelganger staggered. "I carry those mistakes, and I will carry them until I die, but I won't let them define me." The shadow shrieked. Cracks split its skin, leaking wisps of dark smoke. Its form flickered, struggling to hold shape. "You can't destroy me," It hissed, "I am you." "No," Jim said, stepping forward, voice steady. "You're what I used to be." He raised his father's pendant, the one his mother had left behind. It glowed not with power, but with memory, laughter, love, pain, loss. The shadow screamed, collapsing inwards, pulled into itself like a dying star. Silence for the first time in hours. The chamber stood still. "You did it," Merrick whispered, but Jim wasn't smiling. "This was just the beginning," he said. "Now, we find the real The silence in the chamber was thick, broken only by Jim's slow, steady breathing. "He's gone, ... Jim muttered, but the stone altar beneath his feet began to tremble, subtly at first, then violently. Runes along the walls ignited in sequence, one after another, casting a purple-red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Father Merrick's eyes widened. "You didn't just destroy a projection, you awakened the final seal." In the center of the altar, a circular panel cracked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into pitch-black nothingness. From within, a cold wind howled not from air, but from time itself. It carried whispers, ... names, regrets. Jim's father appeared beside them, his spirit faint now, fading at the edges. "You have little time. Verzegel is stirring. He knows you're coming." Jim nodded. "Then we end it now." Before they could descend, Merrick stopped him. "No light spell will work below. That place consumes hope and bends memory. You must hold on to yourself, Jim. Anchor your thoughts." Jim took a deep breath and looked at the pendant in his palm. He pressed it to his chest. "This ... is my anchor." Together, they descended. Step by step, the air thickened like molasses. The stairs coiled downward as if time itself was spiraling. The deeper they went, the more distorted the world became. Jim saw flashes his mother smiling at him from a window. Then, suddenly, that same window engulfed in fire. He blinked. "Gone." "Illusions," Merrick warned. "Echoes of your past, twisted by Verzegel." Jim clenched his jaw, focusing on the present. At the base of the stairs, they entered a chamber that didn't obey geometry. The ceiling was too high yet too close. The walls curved inward and outward at once. Time seemed to stutter. Footsteps echoed before they were taken. In the center stood a stone monolith, glowing faintly. Floating above it was a black orb, rotating slowly, like an eye waiting to blink. A voice filled the chamber. "No mouth, no direction. So ... you passed the test of self." How quaint. It was Verzegel. "You killed your shadow, but it was merely a piece. I am the wound, I am the hunger behind the mirror. You cannot kill a concept, mortal." Jim stepped forward. "No, but I can choose not to feed you anymore." The orb pulsed. "You speak of choice. You were never given one. Your fate was written long before you were born." Suddenly, dozens of dark tendrils burst from the walls, slamming into the floor like monstrous roots. One of them barely missed Jim's foot. Merrick raised his staff, whispering chants of protection. A thin silver barrier shimmered around them. "The final battle is here," Merrick said. "No more tests, no more illusions, only truth." Jim unsheathed the ceremonial dagger his father had left him, blade forged from the bones of a forgotten saint, etched with prayers in a dead language. "Then, let's show Verzegel what truth feels like." He stepped forward, toward the beating eye of darkness. As Jim stepped closer to the pulsing black orb, the chamber warped around him. The walls bled shadows. The ground pulsed like flesh beneath his feet. The air grew thicker, not just with evil, but with memory. "Do you know why I chose your bloodline?" Verzegel-esque voice echoed, smooth and ancient, like oil over broken glass. "Because your family has always been good, too good, ripe for corruption." The orb shattered into 1,000 shards of void, revealing a creature that defied form. Neither beast nor man, it hovered in the air, cloaked in a black mist. Its face constantly shifted. Jim's father, then his own face, then Merrick's, each twisted with agony and malice. Jim gritted his teeth. "You use the faces of those I love, because you have none of your own." The thing laughed low and rumbling. "I am every fear you've ever buried, every sin you denied, every dark thought you whispered to yourself when no one listened. I am truth." Suddenly, the room exploded into chaos. Tendrils of darkness lashed toward Jim, who rolled aside, the floor cracking beneath the blow. Merrick raised his staff again. light bursting from its tip and clashing against the tendrils, burning them into ash. Jim, you must strike the heart. The blade your father gave you, it's the only thing that can sever its bond to this realm. Jim nodded, dodging another strike. He drew the blade, hind in his hand, glowing faintly with a golden hue, as if it remembered the prayers it once carried. The creature lunged forward, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth, like broken obsidian. Jim barely ducked in time. A piece of the altar shattered beside him. He sprang to his feet, breathing hard, but suddenly, the chamber changed. He wasn't in the temple anymore. He was in his childhood home. His mother sat at the kitchen table, humming the lullaby she used to sing. "Stay with us, Jimmy," she said gently, not looking up. "This isn't real," he whispered. His feet sank into the wooden floor. The house began to melt, photos on the wall distorted, turning into screaming faces. His mother turned to him, her eyes completely black. "You think killing me once was enough?" He screamed and stabbed the dagger forward, and the illusion shattered. He was back, sweating, trembling. Merrick was pinned to a wall by black spikes, bleeding but still chanting. "He's using guilt against you." Jim turned. The creature was reforming again, rising from smoke, but now, Jim no longer saw the faces it wore. Now he saw only a void that hungered for meaning. He stepped forward, raising the dagger. "You want truth?" he growled. "Here's mine. I am broken, yes, haunted, but that pain isn't yours to use anymore." And he charged into the dark, blade first. Jim plunged the sacred blade into the center of the creature's shifting form. The dagger struck something solid, something beating, writhing with life. A guttural scream erupted from Verzegel that shook the walls, the ground, the air itself. "You dare!" the thing howled, recoiling. A shockwave burst outward, hurling Jim across the chamber. He hit a column and collapsed, gasping, vision spinning. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Merrick chanting louder, faster, his staff glowing with a desperate light. But Verzegel was not dying, it was adapting. The shadows that had made up its form twisted inward, solidifying. Its shape sharpened, arms elongated into bladed limbs. Its face locked into one. Jim's face twisted in mockery. "If you want to kill me," it hissed, voice now eerily similar to Jim's, "you'll have to kill yourself." Jim rose slowly, chest burning. Blood trickled down his temple, but his grip on the blade remained firm. "I've lived with that voice my whole life," he muttered. "Not anymore." Verzegel lunged. The speed was inhuman. One moment, it was across the chamber. The next, it was upon him. Jim ducked, rolled, slashed upward, catching its shoulder. A hiss, a splash of black smoke, but the thing kept coming. Merrick, now kneeling and barely conscious, lifted his hand. A beam of light shot from his staff, catching the monster in the chest, freezing it mid-strike. "Now Jim, he's CROAKED." Jim charged. With a roar, he drove the blade deep into the creature's heart. This time, the scream wasn't rage, it was fear. "You do not understand what you are unleashing," Verzegel cried. The chamber began to collapse. The walls peeled away into light. The sky above split open like glass, revealing a void of stars and something else, ancient runes, celestial patterns, and shifting forms beyond comprehension. Verzegel's body began to dissolve into threads of shadow, pulled upward toward the rift. "You think you've won, mortal," it rasped. "I was a servant, a whisper. The gate is open now. The true voice ... awakens." And with that, it was gonna sucked into the void, vanishing with one final, echoing scream. The silence afterward was deafening. The chamber returned, cracked, dim, but real. Jim collapsed beside Merrick, heart pounding. The blade in his hand was cracked, dim, but still whole. Merrick opened one eye, smiled faintly. "Told you, ... you had it in you." Jim laughed, breathless. "I'm going to need a long vacation." But above them, in the rift that had begun to close, one rune pulsed faintly, as if watching, ... waiting. The ground beneath them stopped trembling. Dust floated gently through the broken chamber, illuminated by faint rays of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. For a moment, Jim allowed himself to believe it was over. "Is it done?" he asked. Merrick sat upright with a grunt, his beard singed and face pale. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, on the place where the celestial rift had begun to close. "Not done," he finally said. "Just delayed." Jim sighed. That's not very comforting. Merrick chuckled weakly. It never is. They stood together, supporting each other, and limped out of the ruined sanctum into the night. The forest around the ancient prison was still shrouded in mist, but the unnatural whispers had faded. The air no longer felt like it was watching them. As they reached the clearing, Jim turned round. From this distance, the ancient structure almost looked peaceful, its black spires, broken but proud, silhouetted under the starlit sky. We should destroy it, Jim said. Seal it forever. We can't, Merrick replied. The structure is older than our civilizations, built not to keep things in pot, to hold something beneath. Jim's brow furrowed. You mean there's more? There's always more, Merrick said grimly. He opened a satchel and pulled out a weathered journal, bound in red leather. On the front was a golden symbol, the same rune that had glowed in the sky just before the rift closed. This ... was left behind by the Watchers, Merrick said, the first to battle the darkness. It speaks of something they called the Choir Beyond. Choir sounds religious, Jim muttered. Not quite. They weren't worshipped. They were feared. Each one a voice that could shatter minds, reshape reality. Verzegel was just one tongue in the symphony. Jim stared at the journal, the weight of it settling over him like a cold wind. So, we didn't kill the monster. We just silenced. A single verse, Merrick nodded, and somewhere, the rest are listening. They were silent for a while, both staring at the night sky. I'm no chosen one, Merrick, Jim said. I was a janitor with a dark past and a hangover. Why me? Because you don't want to be the chosen one, Merrick replied. That's exactly why you were. Suddenly, a rustling noise from the trees made them both freeze. Jim raised his blade, still glowing faintly, and stepped forward. A young woman emerged from the fog. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, her skin dusted with starlight. She carried no weapon, only an amulet bearing the same rune as the journal. You opened the first verse, she said calmly. Now it's time for the next. Jim's hand tightened on the blade. And who the hell are you? She smiled. The one who remembers. The next song has already begun. Jim didn't lower his sword. You're going to have to explain a lot more than that, he said, eyes narrowed. The woman stepped closer, unbothered by his suspicion. The mist seemed to part for her, as if recognizing something sacred. Her golden eyes never wavered. My name is Alira, she said. I was once a seer of the Ninth Echo. That's not on any map I've seen, Jim replied. That's because it doesn't exist anymore. The echoes were wiped from the records before your ancestors learned to carve stone. Merrick's expression darkened. The echoes are real. Ali nodded, and the choir silenced them, but not before they passed on their knowledge through bloodlines, through dreams, through the scars of survivors. She turned to Jim. You bear the mark. You've heard the fragments in your sleep. The nightmares weren't just visions, they were instructions. Jim stepped back instinctively. That scar on my shoulder, the one I got during the prison riot. Alira shook her head. No, that's just when it became visible. The mark was placed there long before. The moment you were born into darkness. I'm no savior, Jim said, jaw tight. I've killed people. I've run from everything good in my life. I'm not what you're looking for. And yet here you stand, Alira said softly. Alive when you shouldn't be. Facing things no mortal should survive. That's not coincidence. That's purpose. Jim turned to Merrick, but the old man remained silent, thoughtful. For once, he had no snark, no lecture, only a nod. Alira stepped forward and opened her palm. A small sphere of light floated above, it shifting, pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside it, voices whispered, familiar ones, terrifying ones. This is the next verse, she said. A location, a name, and a key. You can choose to walk away, live in peace, or follow the song, and face what's coming. And what is coming? Jim asked. She looked to the horizon. The awakening of the fifth voice, one that speaks not in words but in memory. It won't just kill people, it will rewrite what they believe happened. Jim's hand trembled. A war not of swords or guns but of perception, of truth itself. You don't have to decide now, Alira whispered, but if you wait too long, the song will be written without you. She placed the glowing orb in his hand and vanished into mist, leaving behind only the scent of jasmine and ashdot. Jim stared at the orb, its whispers growing louder. Merrick put a hand on his shoulder. You already know what you're going to do. Jim nodded slowly. Yeah, I just wish I didn't. The orb pulsed in Jim's palm, its heartbeat syncing unnervingly with his own. The whispers had grown sharper, clearer. They no longer sounded like murmurs, but like commands. Find the hollow gate, beneath the ash, beneath the shame. Jim stood at the edge of the camp, the morning mist clinging to his boots like begging hands. Behind him, Merrick stirred the embers of the dying fire. "You're not going to say anything?" Jim asked. Merrick didn't look up. "You already chose." "I haven't even the second you didn't throw it away," Merrick cut in. "That was your choice." Jim grunted. He hated how right the old man always was. Elira had vanished as quickly as she'd appeared, but her presence lingered. The air still smelled like burnt flowers and ancient libraries. The orb, now hovering just above his palm, cast soft ripples through the fog. "What do you think the hollow gate is?" Jim asked. Merrick finally stood, brushing ash from his robe. "If it's what I fear, it's not a place, it's a state of mind, a trap woven from guilt, and those who enter don't always come back as themselves." Jim's stomach turned. "Sounds fun." That's one word for it. The orb flared. Images flashed fleeting and disjointed. A burning church, children laughing beneath a blue sky, a tree made entirely of teeth. Then, a voice. "Walk east until the earth weeps. Beneath the weeping, memory sleeps." "I'm getting real tired of these poetic riddles," Jim muttered, but he started walking anyway. Hours passed. The terrain changed, trees grew gnarled, as if recoiling from something below. The birds fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. Jim's boots sank into soft ground, each step feeling heavier, as though time itself resisted him. Then, he saw it, a pit in the earth, wide and circular, lined with pale roots that reached out like fingers. From its center, thick black water oozed upward, not flowing, not still, just weeping. "The earth weeps," Jim whispered. The orb spun violently, its light refracting into impossible colors. A tone rang in the air, shrill, like a bell, rung inside his skull. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. Merrick arrived moments later, his expression grim. "It's here," the old man said. "The hollow gate." Jim tried to speak, but his voice fractured into echoing syllables. That weren't his. He reached toward the pit, and as his fingers grazed the weeping fluid, his reflection blinked back at him, but it wasn't him. The face in the reflection smiled, a crooked, knowing smile, one that remembered things Jim hadn't yet lived. And then, everything went black. Jim opened his eyes to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that listens. Everything around him shimmered with a waxy translucence, as though reality had been dipped in candlelight. The trees here grew upside down, their roots clawing at the sky. Rivers flowed sideways, clinging to invisible walls. "Time, HICCUPED, double quotes, where, am I?" Jim asked, though his voice arrived 3 seconds after his lips moved. The orb floated beside him, fractured, now split into halves, each pulsing with a separate rhythm. One glowed gold, the other bled black. Then came the laughter, children's laughter. Jim spun around. A field appeared, impossibly close, sunlight streaming down on it, despite the sky being pitch black. Dozens of children ran in circles, their eyes covered with cloth, their mouths sewn shut, but somehow still laughing. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. A voice answered, but it came from inside his own head. "Your memories, out of order, out of context. The gate doesn't show what was, it shows what's buried." The scene changed abruptly. He stood now in a ruined house, walls scorched, a piano broken in two. On the ground, his old combat boots, laced the way he used to do it in training. Jim's breath caught. "No," he muttered. "This place burned down years ago." "That's what you told them," said a figure in the corner. It was himself, younger blood on his hands, eyes wide and wild. "But you never really left, did you?" Jim backed away. "This isn't real, neither is your guilt," the figure snapped, "but it still eats you." The floor crumbled beneath him. Jim fell, not down but inward. Memories whipped past him, flashes of his mother's final breath, the first time he fired a gun, the girl in the red jacket, laughing in a thunderstorm. Then static, then nothing. He landed on a mirror, not glass, water. Maybe it rippled beneath him, showing versions of himself, a soldier, a father, a killer, a coward. Each version stared at him, some with hatred, others with pity. "You can't go forward," they said, in unison. until you choose which version of you gets to survive. Jim looked down. His hands were changing, morphing between his past selves. Scars appeared and disappeared. A wedding ring flickered on, then off. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "Neither was what you did," the reflections whispered. Then, the surface beneath him cracked and he was pulled under darkness. Pressure, and then a heartbeat, but not his own. Jim floated in darkness, his lungs neither full nor empty, his heart suspended in some alien rhythm that pulsed not from within, but around him. The reflections had vanished. Now, there was only silence again, until it spoke. Not a voice, a presence. "You must choose, James." The voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. It sounded like his mother, his commander, his younger self. A symphony of judgment. "Choose what?" Jim shouted. "None of them are me anymore." A light appeared above him, circular, like a spotlight but far too vast. Under it stood 3 versions of himself, clearer now than ever before. The soldier, blood on his uniform, steady eyes, no regret. "I survive, always, no matter the cost." The father, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, a photo of a little girl in his hand. "I live for her, or I don't live at all." The drifter, unshaven, eyes vacant, smelling of booze and shame. "I don't deserve to keep going, but I keep going anyway." Jim stepped forward, trembling. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" The presence whispered. "Because the gate is closing. Only one of you passes through. The rest will be consumed." A timer materialized above the versions. 30 seconds, counting down. They didn't move. They simply stared at him. Jim's mind raced. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't remember who he really was anymore. "The soldiers, ruthless," he muttered. "He got me out of war, but he also buried things." "The father's broken," he whispered, "but he still believes in love." "The drifter, he's given up, but he's honest." The timer ticked down to 10. Jim fell to his knees. "I don't want to be any of them." "Then you will become none," the presence replied. The moment stretched. Reality flickered like a dying flame. Jim looked up. "No," he said, "I am all of them." The presence froze. "That is not a choice. It is now." He stood and stepped forward, arms open, not toward one, but toward all 3. As he touched them, they burned not in pain, but in transformation. Light and shadow wrapped around his body, fusing, condensing. The timer hit 0. A shockwave exploded outward, silence, and then Jim stood alone, whole and changed. Behind him the gate pulsed softly. Ahead was the next threshold, and this time he wasn't running from himself. The gate shimmered like liquid glass, bending the light of a world that no longer obeyed time. Jim stepped through it, and instantly, the cold returned, not physical, but existential. As if reality itself recoiled from him. He blinked and found himself back in the prison camp. But it was different. The sky above was a frozen vortex, churning with ink-black clouds and flashes of red lightning. The ground cracked with each step, revealing veins of glowing blue energy beneath the soil. The buildings around him stood in twisted angles, like someone had built them in a dream and forgotten the rules of architecture. Everything was warped, broken, wrong, and he wasn't alone. Figures moved in the mist, hundreds of them. Prisoners, soldiers, civilians, faces he'd seen before. Some he'd buried with his own hands, but their eyes were empty. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Their hands reached forward, not in anger, but in pleading. "You're not real," Jim whispered, stepping back. One figure stepped ahead, a child, barefoot, wearing a worn-out hospital gown. Her face was pale but familiar. "Emma," he gasped. She didn't answer, just looked at him, tilting her head. Then her voice echoed not from her mouth, but inside his skull. "Why did you leave me, Daddy?" Jim collapsed. The pain was not physical, it was truth, raw and unforgiving. "You're not her," he whispered. "You're just this place. You're what it wants me to feel. But you do feel it," the voice answered, "don't you?" The sky cracked. Something vast and serpentine slithered across the clouds, letting out a sound like screaming metal. The entire prison began to rumble, and in that moment, Jim understood. This wasn't just a vision, it was a final test. The place had read his soul, pulled out every ounce of guilt, shame, and fear, and now it demanded payment. "I'm not the man I used to be," Jim said, standing I don't need to outrun this anymore. He looked at the figure of Emma and smiled through his tears. I remember you, and I love you, but I'm not meant to stay here. With those words, the illusions began to crumble. The child turned to ash. The sky exploded in silence, and from the earth, a staircase of glowing stone rose before him, spiraling upward into a new void. Jim took a deep breath and climbed. Each step Jim took on the glowing staircase made the air feel thinner, as if oxygen itself had become a memory. Behind him, the twisted prison crumbled into oblivion. Ahead, dony darkness, vast and consuming, like the edge of thought itself. And then he reached the top. That there was no door, no final gate, just a flat, endless surface, black as ink, smooth as glass. The sky above was starless, soundless still. Then something shifted, a ripple in the glass-like floor, and from it, a figure rose. Himself, not a version, not a fragment, but the true mirror, dressed in white. Calm, almost serene. You made it, the mirror, Jim said. His voice echoed without force, like wind through empty halls. Jim stayed silent. You carried pain. You faced ghosts. You embraced your failures. What is this? Jim asked. Is this heaven? Hell? The mirror, Jim smiled faintly. It's neither. It's the space between. The final place where truth cannot be avoided. He stepped closer. Here, nothing hides, not even from yourself. Jim's fists clenched. I've been through all of it. I've faced the worst parts of me. What else do you want? To let go? The reflection replied. You haven't done that yet. Suddenly, behind the mirror, Jim, doors began to appear. Dozens, hundreds, floating mid-air. Some ancient, carved with symbols. Others modern. Some burned, some bleeding, some glowing. Each one pulsed. These are exits, the mirror said. Each leads to a different version of your story, a different ending. Jim's eyes scanned the doors. And I get to choose? No, the mirror replied. You get to accept. One door in particular began glowing brighter, rusted metal hatch, exactly like the one in the prison bunker. It radiated heat and pain. Jim swallowed hard. What's behind that one? The mirror's eyes darkened. The truth. Jim took a step forward. Then that's where I'm going. Are you sure? The mirror asked. It's not redemption. It's not peace. It's memory, unfiltered, unforgiving. Jim didn't hesitate. I'd rather face the truth than live in lies. He reached for the handle. The mirror stepped aside. Then you're ready. As Jim pulled the hatch open, a blast of white-hot wind erupted outward, nearly knocking him back. From within came not screams but silence, thick, endless, heavy. With knowing, he stepped inside, and the door slammed shut. Jim stumbled through the door, but this time, he didn't fall into a new realm. He fell, backward in time. The heat, the noise, the stench of burning flesh, it all hit him at once. He was back, the night of the fire, the one he'd refused to remember. Screams echoed in the background. The prison was ablaze. Shadows ran through smoke, and in the center of it, Jim, younger, panicked, holding a rifle, barking orders in the chaos. Get them out. Don't let them burn alive. The memory version of him turned and froze. Standing before him was a prisoner, handcuffed, bloodied, but defiant. Jim's eyes widened. It was the same man from his visions, the same face that haunted him in dreams. Only now, Jim remembered, he hadn't died in the fire. Jim had shot him, point blank in the head, because he thought the prisoner started the fire. But it wasn't true. The real arsonist was a corrupt officer who later disappeared. And Jim, in the confusion, in the fear, pulled the trigger on an innocent man. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. The vision shifted. Now he stood in front of a graveyard. Rows and rows of unmarked graves. A single cross stood out, burned, barely legible. Jim knelt in front of it. His name was Elijah. A voice said behind him. Jim turned. The mirror, Jim stood there once more, no longer glowing but tired. He had a daughter, a family. He begged for his life. Jim couldn't speak. You forgot, the mirror said. Not because you were weak, but because you were human. And humans can't carry that kind of weight forever. Tears streamed down Jim's face. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you were scared. A long silence. Then, the mirror knelt beside him. This place doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to stop running. The ground beneath them began to shake. Above, The sky cracked open, revealing not light, but faces. Dozens of them, hundreds, all the people Jim had failed, forgotten, or feared. But they weren't angry. They were waiting for his choice. Then let it end, Jim whispered. Let me remember. Let me carry it. As he spoke, the grave beneath him burst into light. One by one, the faces began to vanish peaceful-free. And for the first time, Jim felt weightless. Not because he was escaping. But because he had finally accepted the truth. The wind howled through the cemetery as Jim stood, the grave behind him still glowing faintly. Above, the sky had turned dark again, but this time, not with storm clouds, but silence. Not a single whisper, not a single scream. The souls were gone. All but one. Standing across from him was the man he'd killed. Elijah, no longer bleeding, no longer bound, just watching. Jim's throat tightened. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I was wrong. And I can't undo what I did. Elijah took a step forward, eyes locked with his. You've carried it long enough, Elijah replied. But pain doesn't vanish when it's buried, it becomes a ghost. Then, what do I do? Jim asked. How do I make it right? Elijah looked toward the edge of the forest, where a faint path of light began to form. You walk, he said softly, not to escape, but to tell the story, to warn the others, so this place never repeats itself. Jim followed Elijah's gaze. The path shimmered. It didn't promise peace or paradise. It promised truth. Behind him, the ground cracked black, tendrils snaking out from the shadows, pulling at the dirt, the trees, the stones. If you stay, Elijah said, you become part of it. Another voice, another echo. Jim looked back once more. He could feel the pull, the weight of guilt, shame, sorrow urging him to sink. But he took a step forward. Then another. Each step felt like walking through water. Heavy but freeing. Thank you, he whispered. Elijah nodded once and vanished. The grave faded with him, and Jim walked. Through memories, through pain, through the wreckage of a life fractured by fear. The forest began to shift. Leaves shimmered like glass. The air warmed. The fog thinned. And then a door. Simple wooden, carved with names, hundreds of them, some familiar, some long forgotten, all waiting. Jim placed his hand on the knob. You can't undo the past, he murmured, but you can choose what kind of ghost you become. He turned the handle. A soft click. Light spilled through, and Jim stepped forward, not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as a man who remembered. The light swallowed him, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't peace. It was empty. For a moment, Jim felt weightless, like a soul untethered, floating in memory. Then the ground hid his feet against solid, real. He opened his eyes. The forest was gone. No fog, no graves. Just concrete. Dust. And silence. He was standing in the middle of the prison yard, just as it had been all those decades ago. Lean now, it was abandoned. The air thick with rot and rust. The watchtower loomed, broken glass glinting in the dying sun. The same blood-stained wall where he had once stood. Watch still bore the bullet marks, but something was different. The silence was alive. From the far end of the yard, a radio crackled to life. A voice whispered through static. They never left, Jim. He turned slowly. The barracks were open, doors swinging, and inside, shadows moved. Not human, not ghost, remnants of memory, of guilt, of pain so deep it carved itself into the very stone. Jim backed away, but the yard had no exit. The gate had vanished. The tower door swung open, and at the top a chair, a table, a stack of letters, hundreds, all addressed to him, all sealed. Jim approached. Each envelope bore a name: Elijah, Marcus, Daniel, even those he never knew, and one from himself. He tore it open. Inside, a single line: if you forget, they become ghosts again. Suddenly, voices filled the yard, whispers, screams, laughter, cries. The ghosts had never truly passed on. They had followed him, not to haunt, but to remember, to ensure he would never stop carrying them. Jim clutched the letter to his chest and sat in the chair. The radio whispered again: tell it, from the beginning, every time. Jim breathed in and began. Jim's voice echoed through the empty WATCHTOWER. Each word, each memory felt like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. He had begun to tell their stories, one by one, but as the names spilled from his lips, something strange happened. The shadows in the yard started to change. They no longer moved with the erratic twitch of spirits in torment. They stood still, listening, watching, like soldiers, awaiting orders, and then the sky cracked. Not thunder, not lightning, a soundless rupture, like the fabric of the world tearing open just above the prison. Jim ran to the window. A circle of clouds above the yard twisted into a perfect spiral, and in the Centaur symbol, not of any religion he knew, a burning shape, a circle, with 4 slashes crossing its heart. And suddenly, he remembered. Not a dream, not a ghost story, but something deeper, the seal. Back when he first arrived at the camp, the oldest prisoners used to whisper about it, a symbol that wasn't meant to keep spirits out, but to keep something in. Jim stumbled. Back from the window, the voices rose, not the dead soldiers, something older, colder, speaking in a tongue he didn't recognize. The yard was changing. Cracks formed in the concrete, glowing with pale green light, snaking toward the center like veins, and at the center a hole, small at first, then growing. As if the earth itself was rejecting what lay beneath. Jim grabbed the letters. Pages fluttered in his hands, words melting off them like wax in flame. He had triggered something. The stories, they weren't just memories, they were bindings. And now that he'd spoken them, all the prison was unlocked. The hole in the center of the yard widened slowly, steadily, like a wound reopening after years of scarring. From within it rose not fire, but a thick black mist, spiraling like smoke made from tar and sorrow. It slithered across the cracked concrete, creeping up the prison walls and into the open barracks. The mist hissed as it touched anything man-made, corroding metal, rotting wood, and peeling paint from stone. Jim stared down from the watchtower, clutching the stack of half-burned letters. His hands trembled. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't redemption. This was release. From deep within the mist, a sound emerged, low at first, like thunder rolling through stone. Then came the rhythmic, guttural chant of voices not bound by any human language. Jim backed away from the window, but it was too late. The mist surged upward, swallowing the tower's base. The whole structure groaned. The radio burst into static. Then you opened the seal. The voice was not human. Not even remotely. It came from everywhere, echoing inside Jim's mind and rattling through his bones. You carry their guilt, like a badge, but they were not your burden alone. Jim shouted into the empty air. Who are you? What is this? Silence. Then, from within the mist, a shape began to rise, towering, humanoid, but not. It had too many arms, too many eyes, none of which blinked. Its skin shimmered with memories, images of war, screams, betrayal, like a projector cast onto muscle and flesh. I am what they made, it hissed, born of violence, fed by forgetting. Jim fell to his knees. He had believed that remembering the dead was an act of mercy, of honor, but now he saw the truth. The stories weren't just stories, they were chains, and in speaking them aloud, he had shattered each one. The creature hovered over the yard, growing more solid by the second. The ghostly soldiers began to dissolve, no longer needed, no longer trapped. Their mission complete. Jim screamed into the rising mist. How do I stop this? The voice replied. You don't. You finished the story. The wind howled. The letters in his hands disintegrated into ash. And far beneath the yard, the earth cracked with a sound like bones, snapping under pressure. Something ancient was coming, and Jim was the one who let it in. Jim staggered backward, heart pounding like a war drum. The creature was not chasing him, didn't need to. Every step Jim took away from it, it grew larger, as if his fear made it stronger. Then, the mist wrapped around his legs, not pulling but guiding toward the chapel, the abandoned building at the far edge of the camp, where the oldest screams used to echo, where prisoners once sought comfort in the hollow silence. Jim hadn't stepped foot inside in decades, but now the doors creaked, open on their own. Inside, it was untouched by time. Benches still lined with rotting hymns, candles long dead, and at the far end an altar, cracked straight through the middle. Behind it, a mirror he didn't remember, but it reflected him. Not the man he was now, but younger, in uniform, in war, blood on his sleeves. The image flickered now. It showed him dragging a prisoner, screaming in German, to the execution yard, then burying a notebook near the mess hall, eyes darting around. Jim clenched his fists. "No, I didn't do that. I didn't. You did." The voice returned. But it wasn't the entity outside, it was his own voice, from within the chapel walls. "You watched. You obeyed. You survived." Jim dropped to his knees. Memories he had forced down, twisted into new shapes, now rose like bile. The orders he followed, the things he ignored, the man he pretended he wasn't. The ghost soldiers weren't visiting him, they were guarding him, guarding the truth. Suddenly, the walls trembled. The creature's form loomed through the broken windows, whispering things in languages no longer spoken. "You think confession is freedom?" it asked. Jim stood, face pale, eyes wet. "No," he said, "but it's a start." He reached beneath the altar. His fingers touched something solid, the buried notebook, the very same from his memories, leather-worn. Trembling, he opened it. Inside, names, locations, witnesses, dates. Everything he tried to forget, a full account of the war crimes. Of his role. His hands shook as he read it aloud, one name at a time, and with every word spoken, the creature shrank, screamed, fought, but the truth and unedited burned through the mist like daylight. The chapel shook with every name Jim spoke. The air grew thinner. The mist began to evaporate, like fog under morning sun. The creature outside screamed in pure agony, not from pain, but from being seen. Truth was its poison. Jim's voice cracked. "Peter Weiss, 13 years old, executed without cause." He flipped another page. "Corporal Hansen gave the order. I didn't stop him. I looked away." The notebook trembled in his hands, as if the souls within wanted release. And then, silence. For a moment, the entire world held its breath. The creature had vanished, dissolved into nothing but memory and echo. But the chapel remained, and so did Jim. He collapsed into the first pew, the notebook heavy in his lap. His breathing was ragged. His hands, still bloodless, felt stained. Behind him, footsteps. He turned. Slowly, it wasn't a ghost, not a demon. It was the boy, the one he had seen in dreams, covered in ash, with those same haunting eyes. The boy approached, not with hate, but with silence. Jim knelt before him. "I should have saved you," he whispered. "I should have saved all of you." The boy didn't speak, but he nodded once and pointed toward the chapel doors. Light, actual sunlight, breaking through the cracks of a shuttered world. Jim stood. His body felt weak, but lighter somehow, as if the weight had shifted. He followed the boy to the door. Before stepping out, he looked back at the altar, at the mirror, now shattered. No more lies to reflect. Outside, the camp looked different, less haunted, less gray. The fences remained, but they no longer screamed. The air was clean. The birds, real or not, chirped again. But as Jim crossed the threshold, one final thought anchored itself in his mind. The truth doesn't undo the past, but it frees the future. And some stories, no matter how dark, must be told to keep the mist from returning. 3 months later, Jim sat quietly at a long wooden table, facing a row of silent officials. The hearing room smelled of polished oak and dust-covered files, like justice trying to remember itself. He was thinner now, paler, but there was a fire behind his eyes, something new, something earned. A woman in uniform cleared her throat. "Captain Jim Holden, you were the sole survivor of Camp Meriden. The files were burned, witnesses gone. We only have your testimony." Jim nodded, and the notebook. He placed the black leather journal on the table like a relic. "Worn, scarred, alive." The room, TENSED. One of the officials asked, "Do you really expect us to believe there was a supernatural force, that the camp itself was haunted by guilt?" Jim stared directly into his eyes. "No, I expect you to believe that silence is dangerous, that when people vanish, and we look away, monsters grow in the shadows." He paused, then added, "You don't need to believe in ghosts, just in consequence." The panel exchanged glances, some skeptical, some shaken, but none dismissed him. When the session ended, Jim walked out into the sun. Real sun this time, not the harsh white of a camp floodlight, but the golden kind that warms the skin Outside, a journalist approached Captain Holden. "Do you have any final statement for the public?" Jim hesitated, then said, "Names matter. Stories matter. If we forget what happened in that camp, if we bury it, we're no better than the thing that haunted it." He held up the notebook. "This is not a collection of ghosts. It's a mirror." And with that, he walked away, not into glory, but into truth. That night, in a small rented room above a diner, Jim sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, opened the notebook to the last page, blank dot, and for the first time in years, he picked up a pen and began to write, not about death, but about what came after, about how the fog lifted, how the dead stayed dead, but the truth stayed alive. That night, Jim dreamed again, but this time it wasn't the camp. No screams, no blood-soaked dirt, no fog dot. He stood in a vast open field, under a sky littered with stars. The grass swayed gently in a wind that didn't chill, it soothed. Dot ahead, a line of figures appeared, silent, motionless. Children, soldiers, civilians. Dot, all the names he had spoken. Their eyes met his, not with blame, but with peace, not with sorrow, but with release. The boy Peter Weiss stepped forward once more. No ashes now, no burns, just a child with a shy smile. Jim approached him slowly, his voice cracked. "I kept forgetting your name. I'm sorry." Peter shook his head. "You remembered. That's what matters." Jim knelt, eye level with the boy. "Is it over?" Peter looked up at the stars. "For us, yes." And then he placed something in Jim's hand. A tiny, folded paper, crane fragile, pure white, glowing faintly. Jim unfolded it. Inside, written in a child's messy scrawl, "You're not the monster." The field shimmered. One by one, the spirits turned, walking toward a distant hill, where golden light poured over the horizon like morning after endless night. No chains, no fear, just peace. Jim stood alone now, but the silence was not empty, it was whole. When he awoke, the first light of dawn crept through the window. His notebook sat beside him, open on the desk. The last page now had words, his handwriting, though he didn't remember writing them. Some ghosts don't need to be banished, they just need to be acknowledged. He closed the book, and for the first time in decades, Jim Holden smiled. Weeks passed. Jim didn't return to the woods, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't need to. He stayed in town, fixed up the little bookstore on Elm Street that had been boarded up since 2009, renamed it the Hollow Lantern. Locals asked about the name. Jim would just shrug and say, "It's where lost light finds a way out." The shop became a quiet refuge. People came in not just for books, but to sit, to talk, to remember. He kept a special shelf, no titles, just worn notebooks. People could write whatever they wanted. Letters to the dead, apologies, confessions. He never read them, just kept them safe. One afternoon, a teenager, quiet eyes, too old for his age, left a drawing in the notebook. A boy standing in fog, holding a lantern. Behind him, shadows. Ahead, nothing but light. Jim smiled, tapped the glass with his knuckle. "You're not alone, kid." That evening, a small package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single black and white photograph. It showed the original Camp Asridge, taken some time before the war. In the corner, barely visible, stood a line of prisoners. One of them, a young soldier, bore an uncanny resemblance to Jim. He stared at it for a long time, then flipped it over. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "Some guilt doesn't mean you were guilty. Some ghosts just want a witness." He framed it, hung it above the register. People would glance at it and ask, "That your grandfather?" Jim would nod, something like that. And when they walked away, he'd whisper to the photo, "Still here, still remembering." They say some places never forget, that certain lands soak up pain like rain holding on. Long after the clouds are gone, Asridge was one of those places, but what made it dangerous wasn't the spirits trapped there, it was the silence that followed them. It was the way people stopped telling the truth, stopped remembering, stopped witnessing. Jim didn't banish any demons, he didn't break a curse, he didn't find absolution in a blinding flash of light, he just listened. He stood still, and that was enough. Sometimes, all a ghost needs is someone willing to say, "I see you," someone to carry the story forward, not as a warning, but as a reminder that horror isn't always teeth and shadows. Sometimes it's what we leave unsaid. The locked box in our attic, the unanswered knock, the dream we pretend we didn't have. But there's hope in the telling. Peace in the naming. When you speak a ghost's name, not in fear, but in understanding, it fades, not because it's gone, but because it's been heard. And in the quiet aftermath, when the wind rustles through the trees and the lanterns are all burned out, there's still something left, a breath, a memory, a story, and maybe that's all any of us are in the end. Not the screams, not the silence, but the space, in between, the echo, the light that flickers, but refuses to die. Thanks for listening to Ton. True Youve. If this story stayed with you, maybe it was meant to. Until next time, keep your lights on. Some roads are darker than they seem. Well, today's story has come to an end, but did those mysterious events really finish? Be careful, for the darkness might still linger somewhere out there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more terrifying ghost stories. Sleep well, if you dare.